During my father-in-law's 60th birthday celebration, my mother-in-law publicly scolded me in front of our family. She said I was unattractive and bad at preparing things. I felt embarrassed and wondered where my husband, who usually supports me, was, but he was nowhere to be seen. As soon as I arrived at my in-laws' house, feeling fine, my mother-in-law suddenly complained about her back pain and acted as if she couldn't move. She handed all the party preparations over to me, and later, she continued to criticize me in front of everyone there for the celebration. Her harsh words dampened the festive mood, turning it awkward and tense. My father-in-law finally spoke up, breaking the silence with a simple but surprising question: "Is that all you have to say?" No one could have guessed what would happen next. I'm Sarah, 35 years old, and I married my husband Michael 6 years ago. He's 3 years younger than me, and we have a 5-year-old daughter. My mother-in-law has disliked me since the beginning because I'm older than her son. Every time I visit for holidays or special occasions, she makes sarcastic remarks, especially when my husband isn't around. She said things like, "I wish I had a younger, prettier daughter-in-law, not someone with age spots like you." Hearing these things hurts, especially because she criticizes my appearance, but I try not to react, hoping to keep the peace since we only see each other a few times a year. However, my silence seems to irritate her more, and she escalates, calling me thick-skinned and unmodest for not reacting to her insults. In front of my husband, she acts completely differently, being kind and polite to me. My husband has no idea how badly she treats me, and I avoid sharing my frustrations because I'm afraid he might not understand and I'll end up blamed. Going to her house has become very difficult for me, but my father-in-law is kind and gentle. He doesn't talk much, but he senses when her words get to me. On those occasions, he quietly reassures me, saying, "Sarah, if things are hard for you, don't hesitate to let me know. I want to be here for you." I often wondered if my father-in-law noticed the way my mother-in-law harassed me. Maybe he held back from openly supporting me to avoid making things harder for me. To celebrate my kind father-in-law's 60th birthday, our family got up early and drove 3 hours to their house. I was feeling a bit under the weather with a mild fever and lingering fatigue, so my husband Michael did all the driving. When we arrived, my mother-in-law came out with a cheerful smile. "Well, look who's here. It's been a while, Michael," she said. Then she looked at him and added, "You look tired." Michael admitted he was tired from the drive, and she offered to get a bed ready so he could rest. Michael suggested I should rest too since I had been taking care of our daughter on the drive and wasn't feeling well, but my mother-in-law quickly interrupted, saying, "Oh, Michael, I called Sarah yesterday, and we planned to go shopping together for the birthday celebration." I was surprised since she hadn't called or made any such plan with me. Exhausted from watching over our active 5-year-old and feeling unwell, I wanted to rest, too. Michael noticed this and suggested that maybe his mother could do the shopping without me, but she insisted, "It's your father's big day, and I want Sarah to help pick the best ingredients. Sarah, you'll keep your promise, right?" Without giving me a chance to explain, she grabbed my arm and steered me back to the car. Once we were out of Michael's earshot, she glared at me and muttered, "I don't think you need time to rest." Then, with a forced smile, she loudly thanked me for driving, keeping up the act for Michael. Reluctantly, I agreed. I turned to hand our daughter over to Michael, but my mother-in-law quickly took her, put her in the car seat, and shut the door, saying, "Taking care of the child is a mother's job." With no other choice, I got into the driver's seat, telling Michael I'd handle the shopping. As soon as we started driving, her tone changed completely. "You can't even take care of your own child properly. Stop making Michael do everything for you. You're just an incompetent, aging daughter-in-law." Michael waved goodbye, unaware of her words. The drive to the supermarket was tense. My mother-in-law continued to criticize me, saying, "I'll make you regret being lazy and letting my son do all the work." I tried to explain that I wasn't feeling well, but she cut me off, blaming my poor health on bad self-care. She even commented on my appearance, saying I had crow's feet, dark spots on my cheeks, and sagging skin. By the time we arrived, I felt completely drained, nodding along just to get through the ordeal. I sometimes wondered if my father-in-law noticed how my mother-in-law treated me. Maybe he didn't openly support me to avoid making things harder. To celebrate his 60th birthday, we left early and drove 3 hours to their house. I wasn't feeling great. I had a mild fever and felt tired, so my husband Michael handled the driving. When we arrived, my mother-in-law came out smiling. Well, look who's here. It's been a while, Michael," she said cheerfully. Then, noticing how tired he looked, She offered to prepare a bed for him to rest. Michael accepted, and he suggested I rest too since I'd been taking care of our daughter on the drive and wasn't feeling well. But my mother-in-law interrupted, saying, "Oh, Michael, I called Sarah yesterday, and we planned to go shopping together for the birthday celebration. You go rest, Michael, and Sarah will join me as soon as she brings in the luggage." I was surprised, as she hadn't called or made any plans with me. I was exhausted from watching our energetic 5-year-old, and I really wanted to rest too. Michael could see this and suggested, "Since Sarah's not feeling well, maybe you could handle the shopping alone." But my mother-in-law was firm. "It's a special day, and I want Sarah's help to choose the best ingredients. Sarah, you'll keep your promise, right?" She didn't give me a chance to refuse. After I set down the luggage, she took my arm, pulling me back toward the car. Once we were away from Michael, she glared at me and said, "I don't think you need to rest." But when we got into the car, she loudly thanked me for driving, keeping up a friendly appearance for Michael. Reluctantly, I got into the driver's seat. I tried to hand our daughter to Michael, but my mother-in-law quickly placed her in the car seat, shutting the door. "Looking after the child is a mother's job," she said. Then, as soon as we started driving, her tone changed completely, and she began criticizing me. "You can't even look after your child properly. Stop making Michael do everything. You're just an incompetent, aging daughter-in-law." Michael waved goodbye. Not hearing any of this, I drove us to the supermarket. Tense from her constant criticisms, she continued to berate me, saying, "I'll make you regret being lazy and making my son drive." I tried to explain I wasn't feeling well, but she cut me off, blaming my health issues on poor self-care. She even made rude comments about my appearance, saying I had crow's feet, dark spots, and sagging skin. By the time we arrived, I was completely drained and just nodded along to get through it. "Please, can I rest a bit?" I asked my mother-in-law, hoping for a small break, but she snapped, "You have no right to defy me. This is what you get for making Michael drive alone." I murmured to myself, "Is this really what you want? If you have time to complain, you have time to work," she replied, urging me on. "Hurry up, we're short on time." After eating, clean the bathroom and toilet. Even though it felt unfair, I didn't want to make a scene. I spent the day weeding the garden and scrubbing the bathroom, thinking that after this birthday party, I wouldn't have to see her for a while. Just as I finished, Michael, who had been resting, came over. He looked at me with surprise and concern. "Sarah, are you okay? Don't push yourself too hard if you're not feeling well." "Thank you," I said gratefully. "I'll take a short break." But just as I was about to lie down, my mother-in-law let out a dramatic cry, clutching her back. She had been moving around just fine a moment ago, but now she complained of sudden back pain. With a weak voice, she said, "This is terrible. My back hurts so much. I can't do anything. I won't be able to cook for everyone." Then she looked at me. "Sarah, you're my only hope. What should I do?" Though I was tired and feeling a bit sick, I forced myself to help. I asked Michael to look after our daughter and went into the kitchen. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. I cook all the time," I replied, trying to put on a brave face, even though my head was spinning, and the smell of food was making me nauseous. I kept going because it was an important day for my father-in-law. When I finished cooking, my father-in-law came into the kitchen and smiled at me. "Thank you for preparing all this, Sarah." "Not at all. It's for you," I said, hoping he'd enjoy the meal. Soon, relatives started arriving, and the atmosphere was lively as they gathered to celebrate. But just as we were about to start eating, my mother-in-law interrupted. "I'm sorry, everyone," she announced. My back pain flared up, so my daughter-in-law had to cook all the food. I apologize for the unappetizing meal prepared by my unattractive, clumsy daughter-in-law. The room fell silent as my father-in-law and Michael froze in shock. She continued, "She's not only unattractive, but also completely inept. I worry that Michael is stuck with a woman like this." The festive mood turned somber. Like a funeral, my supportive husband, who was supposed to be watching our daughter, was nowhere to be seen. Then, unexpectedly, my father-in-law, who had been sitting quietly, stood up. "Is that all you have to say?" Before my mother-in-law could respond, Michael walked in holding our daughter and a suitcase. His face was unusually serious. "Dad," he said, "I've packed her things, just like you asked." My mother-in-law's face lit up, thinking I was the one being kicked out, but Michael handed the suitcase to her instead. Shocked, she stammered, "What?" My father-in-law's voice cut through the silence. "Take your things and leave this house immediately." Stunned, my mother-in-law realized what was happening. She tried to argue. Why should I be the one kicked out? Sarah is the useless one. She doesn't even keep the bathroom clean. But her words had no effect. The family had finally had enough of her treatment of me. The toilet is left dirty, and you call Sarah useless? She's done more for this household than you ever do, and I'm tired of watching you treat her so poorly, my father-in-law said, his patience finally worn thin. It's a mother-in-law's duty to discipline her daughter-in-law, she argued, trying to keep her composure. I was just pointing out her faults. It's my way of preparing her for taking care of us one day. Preparing her? You mean tormenting her? My husband interrupted, holding up a receipt he'd found. She even paid for today's groceries. Don't tell me you just forgot to mention that. Well, I was going to pay her back, she stammered, trying to explain. My father-in-law looked at her with raised eyebrows. Enough, you've been bullying Sarah, and it ends today. Desperately, my mother-in-law tried her usual tricks, crying and pleading with my husband, but this time, he wasn't swayed. Mia already told us about what happened in the supermarket, and in the car too. You made Sarah weed the garden and clean the bathroom. You can't hide the truth from us anymore. You can't believe what a child says, she protested. Mia doesn't lie, my husband replied, walking to the car and activating the dashcam. The footage, complete with audio and clear expressions, started to play, revealing her harsh words in the car. Relatives who had gathered nearby watched, shocked by what they saw and heard. That's horrible. I can't believe she'd treat her that way, murmured one of the relatives. Mother-in-law's face turned pale. Panicking, she suddenly dashed toward the car, surprisingly swift for someone with back pain, and tried to turn off the dashcam. But before she could, my father-in-law held her arm firmly. She was caught. With her misdeeds laid bare, my mother-in-law sank to the ground, speechless. My father-in-law then handed her a paper. I've filled in my part. You just need to sign here. A divorce form? She gasped. Yes. I never thought it would come to this, but I'm done. Don't ever step foot in this house again. She tried pleading, this time to me. Sarah, please forgive me, she whimpered, tears streaming down her face. But I wasn't swayed. You exposed your own behavior. I can't forgive you, I said firmly. It's time for you to go. As she grabbed her suitcase, the commotion had attracted the attention of the neighbors, who watched from afar. Mother-in-law, seeing her theatrics were useless, quickly took her suitcase and left, her supposed back pain miraculously gone. After she had left, I turned to my father-in-law. I'm sorry for all this on your 60th birthday. Sarah, you've done nothing wrong. I'm sorry for the trouble you've had to endure, he replied kindly, with warmth in his eyes. Relatives stayed and enjoyed the meal I'd prepared, praising the food and creating a warm and lively celebration. All my exhaustion faded away, and we finally celebrated my father-in-law's milestone in a truly joyous atmosphere. Eventually, my mother-in-law agreed to the divorce, and it was discovered she had also been misusing my father-in-law's funds, spending recklessly. She was ordered to repay the $10,000 she had spent. Facing financial challenges, she was left to manage on her own. And with that, peace returned to our family, a sense of relief and new beginnings settling in as we moved forward without her disruptive presence. Since the divorce, my mother-in-law's life has drastically changed. Now, she works as a janitor in an office building late at night, struggling financially and living in a rundown apartment that's seen better days. Meanwhile, my life has taken a joyful turn. A few weeks after the family gathering, I found out I was pregnant with our second child. It turns out the discomfort I'd been feeling that day was from the early stages of pregnancy. Now, 5 months along, my husband Michael has been incredibly caring and attentive. An ultrasound confirmed we're expecting a baby boy, and both Michael and my father-in-law are thrilled, eagerly awaiting his arrival. My father-in-law even sent over a set of blue baby clothes as a gift, a touching gesture that made me feel truly cherished. Our daughter, who's also overjoyed at the thought of having a younger brother, practices taking care of her dolls every day, pretending they're her baby brother. Watching her gentle play fills me with happiness and hope for the peaceful future we're building as a family. Our lives are finally filled with warmth, support, and joy, just as a family should be.
You don't have a ticket. Poor people like you can't possibly appreciate music. I found myself at a classical concert venue thanks to my father-in-law and mother-in-law, but somehow my ticket had gone missing. The sneers and judgmental stares were palpable. How dare someone like you try to mingle with us? Go home. I was being blatantly discriminated against. But just as I was feeling utterly defeated, my mother-in-law stepped in to help. Little did my sister-in-law know her own world was about to collapse. My name is Betty. I've loved music since I was a child. Being surrounded by the melodies that moved me was pure joy. But I was shy and introverted, so I mostly played with toy instruments alone. My family wasn't wealthy, so music lessons were out of the question. When I was in elementary school, I eagerly joined the wind ensemble and stuck with it through high school. However, in group settings, I always felt like I was dragging everyone down, which became a source of trauma for me. It made me uncomfortable in group situations, even outside of music. I found peace playing an instrument alone, often retreating to a quiet corner of the music room. One day, my music teacher noticed me and introduced me to a well-known musician who recognized a rare talent in me. Unfortunately, my parents, due to our financial situation, couldn't support my passion. I always thought that if I could get proper training, I might overcome my fear of playing in a group. But because of our circumstances, that was never an option. Eventually, I gave up on the idea of pursuing music professionally and settled for enjoying it as a hobby. When I got my first paycheck as an adult, I splurged on a ticket to a classical concert. I was a big fan of a particular family of musicians that I deeply admired. The tickets were expensive, even for the worst seats, but I thought this might be my only chance, so I went for it, with no regrets. The experience was worth every penny, and I was completely satisfied. I'd love to attend more concerts, but with other financial responsibilities, like contributing to my family and saving for a wedding, I can't afford expensive tickets regularly. As for marriage, I'm just waiting to meet the right person. After working for 3 years, my parents started hinting that I should think about my future. Back in their day, people usually got married in their late 20s or early 30s. My mom married my dad around that time too. Nowadays, personal choice is valued more, and my parents understand this, so they don't pressure me. But the lack of pressure sometimes makes me feel like I need to hurry up and get married. Despite having a job, I'm still shy and introverted. I've been invited to group dates by female coworkers, but I never really talked to anyone. Just considering going on a group date was progress for me, so I decided to start with online conversations through a dating app. That's where I met a guy who loves music just as much as I do. We hit it off online, and after exchanging messages for a while, he asked to meet up. When we finally met, I was stunned to realize he was a member of the famous musical family I admired so much. People might wonder why I didn't recognize him from his profile picture, but who would think it was really him? His name was common enough that it didn't raise any suspicions. I figured if he knew I was a fan, he might turn me down. I kept it a secret at first, but eventually I decided to be honest. I told him about my shyness and how uncomfortable I am in large groups. He reassured me, saying he felt the same way. The more we talked, the more we connected, and soon enough, we decided to get married. When I finally confessed that I was a fan, he was genuinely honored, his smile radiant. Everything was going smoothly, and soon we were set to meet his parents. His family was usually busy touring, but there was one day when they would all be home. I nervously entered his house, waiting to meet his parents while his sister-in-law entertained me. She casually mentioned, "As you might know, we're a musical family. If you can't at least play the violin, you're not really part of the family, you know." I was in trouble. I had never touched a violin in my life. The school's band club didn't even have violins. Just when I thought I was doomed, his parents stepped in, saying, "If she has musical skills, any instrument will do." But his sister-in-law insisted on the violin. Then he spoke up, "Mom, don't we have a practice violin we can borrow? Can you give Betty and me some time for a quick lesson?" His mother agreed, smiling. "Why not? It'll be interesting to see what you can do in an hour. A string instrument and a violin at that." I wasn't confident I could even make a sound in just an hour. But he reassured me, "Trust me, Betty, you'll be fine." I took his word for it and even asked my mother-in-law if I could borrow her violin. It was my first time holding a violin, let alone playing one. Honestly, I was terrible. But Twinkle Twinkle Little Star was a song I knew well, so I focused on putting emotion into my playing since my technique was non-existent. "You're doing great, Betty," my mother-in-law encouraged me. "Just making a sound on the violin is hard. You've come a long way, especially considering it's your first time. You're giving the music the respect it deserves." My husband also praised me, saying, "You move me," and gave me a big round of applause. The only one who looked unimpressed was my sister-in-law. I guess she expected me to embarrass myself and never imagined I'd actually be liked by her mother. And so I was accepted into this musical family and officially became a married woman. Though my relationship with my father-in-law and mother-in-law was good, a problematic dynamic with my sister-in-law began to emerge. She started picking on me, making snide remarks, and harassing me. She was very pushy and always retaliated if I talked back, but I didn't have the courage to stand up to her, which seemed to irritate her even more. The harassment intensified when the family was on tour. On days when my sister-in-law didn't have performances due to the tour schedule, it was just the two of us left at home. Although we had a housekeeper, my sister-in-law insisted that I should cook. After tasting my cooking, she would always say it was awful and poorly made. Even when she told me to remake the meal, she'd throw it away right in front of me, saying she didn't want to eat it anymore. She even spilled soup intentionally and did things like stepping on the small of my back or putting her foot on my head. Even during family dinners, she'd call me to the bathroom, saying, "When will you learn proper table manners? I don't want to share a table with someone like you." While my husband, father-in-law, and mother-in-law thought I was improving, my sister-in-law would say, "I can't believe you can't even manage that." I didn't think I was as ill-mannered as she claimed, but the sadness and frustration of not being acknowledged made me feel pathetic. After she left, I'd hide and wipe away my tears. Then my husband would come, saying I was worried when you didn't come back. "Wait, why are you crying? Is she giving you a hard time? Don't hold back, tell me everything." What a sweet man. I almost confessed, but I heard the joyful laughter from the family gathering and didn't want to upset him just for me. I thought if I could be patient, it would keep the peace. "No, it's not like that. I get along with her," I said. But he persisted. "But you were crying." I quickly covered, I was just so happy to be married and accepted by everyone. I couldn't help but cry. My husband seemed to ponder briefly but soon agreed, "Yeah, you're right." He then took my hand, saying, "Let's continue with dinner," and led me back to the dining table. It seemed we'd finally get some downtime with my father-in-law and mother-in-law, who even suggested going to a classical music concert as part of welcoming me. Listening to various performers and interpretations from different conductors can be enlightening, they said. They asked me which concert I'd like to attend, so I recommended one they had previously enjoyed. We found out they could possibly get tickets through a connection they had, but my sister-in-law insisted on handling the tickets, claiming she had some pull with the people involved. On the day of the event, we arrived at the venue, and my sister-in-law headed over to the staff entrance. After a brief chat with the staff, she returned with something that looked like tickets. One by one, she handed them out to everyone, except me. "People who are broke wouldn't understand music anywhere, right?" she sneered. "Excuse me, you and I are on different levels. Know your place and go home. You don't belong here." My husband offered to ask if there were any spare tickets available, but I didn't want to worsen my sister-in-law's mood and make things uncomfortable for everyone else. So I decided it was best to leave and started pulling my husband away. But then my mother-in-law, who had been silent, intervened. "Wait, Betty, you're not the one who needs to leave. It's her who's always mistreating you," she said, pointing at my sister-in-law. "Why me?" my sister-in-law protested. "Listening to music has nothing to do with being rich or poor. People have their own ways to enjoy it. It's not for others to interfere," my mother-in-law scolded. Sister-in-law, who had always been cold to me, shot back, "You think I don't know? It's obvious something's been going on behind my back." "That's not true," my mother-in-law responded calmly. "But I find your envious heart far more impoverished." My brother-in-law, who had been quiet until now, chimed in, "Aren't you always sleeping through concerts? You may not realize it, but it's glaringly obvious." He chuckled, adding, "Sure, you graduated from a music conservatory and won some awards, but you became complacent and stopped improving. If you're going to talk about what music is, then you should first strive to be better yourself." Brother-in-law regretted that he couldn't be more straightforward with his wife about her lacking skills and attitude as a musician, but doing blatant harm to his brother's wife was something he couldn't stomach. You have neither awareness nor ambition as a musician. I think it's time for you to leave our family. I'm tired of supporting someone who shows no promise of growth," he said, seizing the opportunity to finally express his frustration. "You're one to talk, old lady," his sister-in-law retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your music sense is so outdated I can't even listen to it. It's the sound of someone who caters to the poor. So of course, I'd be thrilled to leave this awful musical family." Her strong words echoed in the room as she declared she would go solo, make a fortune, and prove everyone wrong. I had always thought people like her were incapable of self-reflection, but I didn't expect this level of rage. In the end, she stormed off, throwing a concert ticket on the ground. My mother-in-law calmly picked it up and handed it to me. "Let's go," she said, taking my hand, and we walked out together. My second experience with a classical concert was truly moving. Different musicians and conductors bring a unique vibe and structure to the same piece. I marveled at how the same composition could sound so different, discovering new interpretations and learning so much. My mother-in-law seemed to notice my enthusiasm. After the tension between my brother-in-law and sister-in-law reached a boiling point, their marriage eventually ended in divorce. My former sister-in-law hastily organized her solo concert, ignoring advice and overconfidently renting a venue that held 5,000 people. Even popular classical concerts rarely fill such large spaces, so it was no surprise when tickets didn't sell. She ended up buying many herself to make the hall look less empty. Her merchandise sat unsold, leaving her with an overstocked warehouse. Her second solo concert was equally disastrous, attracting only a handful of attendees. Lacking both talent and a likable personality, she became unpopular, and online criticism abounded. Unable to pay her staff or cover other costs, she quickly sank into debt. Attempts at street performances were met with harsh comments like, "You're terrible, stop annoying us," and even resulted in water being thrown at her. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law suggested that I should get professional music training, given my apparent talent. I was both surprised and delighted by the suggestion, though I felt it was a bit late to start learning an instrument, but it felt like an opportunity I had once given up on was presenting itself again. And I couldn't believe it. I was told the choice of instrument was up to me, and I'm considering the violin, especially since my husband has been helping me with it. My mother-in-law found a top-notch instructor who has nurtured many skilled violinists. I even began accompanying the family on their concert tours and helping out behind the scenes. Every day feels blissful as I spend more time with music and feel myself improving. My current dream is to perform a solo, accompanied by my husband on the piano. Oh wait. What does this mean? I couldn't help but let out a surprised murmur. I was in a state of confusion, not fully grasping the situation. But then it dawned on me. This was my ticket to freedom. The more I thought about it, the happier I felt. My life was about to begin anew. It turns out I'm the type whose efforts pay off later in life. I'm Emily, a 38-year-old housewife. My husband, Robert, is 3 years older than me and works in an office. We met when Robert visited my workplace on business. Surprisingly, Robert and I shared the same last name, which was particularly unusual because it wasn't common. This coincidence sparked our initial conversations. One day, we discovered that we came from the same hometown. I had moved to the city for college, so this shared background brought us even closer. Talking to him every day quickly became the highlight of my day. Eventually, Robert asked me out to dinner, and that's when our relationship really took off. After several dates, Robert confessed his feelings, and we started dating. Both of us had a strong desire to marry, so it didn't take long for marriage to become a realistic prospect. We got married after 6 months of dating. We didn't have a wedding ceremony, though. At the time, my dad fell ill, and the mood wasn't right for a celebration, so we decided to skip it. Since I was quite busy, Robert took care of the marriage paperwork. After we got married, Robert requested that I quit my job to focus on household duties. Influenced by his mother, Isabel, who was a housewife, Robert was resistant to the idea of a working woman. I had always dreamed of my job, so giving it up was something I struggled with. I hinted at this to Robert, but he was unwavering in his decision. He firmly insisted I become a housewife. Swept up in the thrill of marriage, I eventually consented, despite my boss's sarcastic remarks about how unusual it was these days. I resigned, and so began my married life with Robert, living just the two of us in an apartment. We thought about building a house but decided to wait until we had children. Although we wanted kids, they didn't come as easily as we had hoped. In the first year of our marriage, something unexpected happened. We started living with Robert's mother, Isabel, making it a 3-person household. Initially, Isabel had refused to live with us, so in a way, I felt relieved, thinking we could maintain a comfortable distance. But suddenly, she proposed moving in. Apparently, Isabel had accumulated substantial debts due to gambling and had become desperate. She had to sell her own house, leaving us no choice but to accept her without any prior discussion. Suddenly, a large amount of her belongings arrived at our home. When I expressed my shock to Robert, he casually said, "It's a good opportunity since Mom is getting old. If she fell at home alone, nobody would find her. And since she eats so little, our expenses won't increase much." I was now resigned to spending my days with Isabel. I absolutely hated that idea. It made me wish I could go back to work. When I mentioned this to Robert, he became aggressive, saying, "Are you mocking me by working? Do you find it amusing to spread the word that my income alone isn't enough for us?" In this day and age, dual-income households are not uncommon, and everyone around me works. That's why they can afford stylish clothes, something I envied. With my mere $100 monthly allowance, I could only afford high school-level cosmetics. My clothes were limited to sale items from local clothing stores. I was growing increasingly frustrated with this lifestyle. Before marrying, I loved fashion and worked in a magazine's editorial department. Since getting married, I hadn't been able to wear the clothes I liked. I wasn't even trusted with the household finances and was handed $100 a week. That was all I had to manage our living expenses, including food. Honestly, $100 a week was tough for living expenses. No matter how many times I brought this up to Robert, he would refute it, saying, "I know someone who manages on $80 a week. It's not that it's entirely impossible. I could make do by preparing budget meals." But then the complaints were tremendous. That's right, Robert subjects me to emotional abuse. If we were saving money, maybe it would be tolerable, but Robert doesn't save at all. Indulging in excursions. He's reckless with both money and time. It's not uncommon for him to miss the last train after a night out and return by taxi. He plays golf whenever he pleases. On top of that, any mistakes he makes somehow become my fault. If he oversleeps, it's blamed on me. If he loses a document, I'm the first to be suspected. My friends can't hide their surprise at Robert's behavior. Since we got married, his personality seems like that of a different person. I feel like a hired housekeeper in my own home, and with Isabel's arrival, I feel even less alive. However, Isabel had nowhere else to live. She moved into the room we had kept open for future children. From that day, my hellish days began. Firstly, Isabel wakes me up early in the morning. She wakes up at 4 o'clock a.m. every day and tells me to wake up even earlier. In the cold winter, it's expected that a housewife wakes up before everyone else to warm up the house. For some reason, it's seen as natural for a housewife to sacrifice herself for the family. Despite not having chosen this housewife life for myself, this mindset is imposed on me. Then, Robert and I drink almost every night, discussing how I am an incompetent wife. The cost of the alcohol is included in my $100 weekly allowance, making living impossible. Talking to Robert about this gets me nowhere, so I end up using my savings from before I was married. It's becoming increasingly depressing even now. When I consulted my mom, she said, "You have to accept it for now. Bad things will return to those who do evil. Just live each day honestly, believing that if the worst comes to worst, you can always divorce, and he'll be a stranger. I won't be around forever either." As I listened earnestly, she continued, "Don't worry, Emily. You're the type whose efforts will pay off later. You've always ended up lucky in the end, ever since you were a child." I've always trusted my mom's words. Since childhood, whenever I went to her with problems, she never gave me the answers I wanted, but somehow she always managed to convince me. Being an only child, I worry about my mom, who lives far away. And since my dad hasn't fully recovered from his illness, I can't be at ease. However, I lack the freedom to visit my parents' home easily. When people hear all this, they wonder why I don't just get a divorce. I would probably think the same if I heard it from a friend, but there's a reason for it. It's Robert's duality. In front of Isabel, Robert acts like a tough, domineering husband. He even gives me orders and, as I mentioned before, subjects me to emotional abuse. But when it's just the two of us, he's different. He tries to listen to my opinions and cries when I say I'm at my limit with this lifestyle. He always says, "You're the only one I can show my weak and lousy side to. If I didn't have you, I might as well end my life." Robert has an unstable side, so I can't take these words lightly. In the end, things always remain ambiguous, and our fights fizzle out. But I have nothing but dissatisfaction with this life. I can't imagine ever getting used to a life where I'm tormented by Isabel all day. Moreover, we live in an apartment that's not particularly spacious. It's a 2-bedroom unit where I've been living since my single days. I can't avoid seeing them constantly. Then, a major incident occurred. My banking card went missing. I was sure it was there just the day before, and there were no signs of my room being ransacked. At first, I thought it was my mistake and searched desperately, but the place where I keep my important things is always the same, so it was strange. Then something suspicious happened. Isabel suddenly bought an expensive bag. Frankly, there's no way she could afford such a thing. She usually gambles away her pension as soon as she gets it. I suspected it was my money, but it was hard to confront her directly, so I consulted Robert. "I think the money for Isabel's bag might be from my account," I said. Robert looked at me as if I were foolish and became aggressive. "Are you saying there's a thief in the family? Are you trying to blame Mom so you can extort more money from me? Cut it out." I was astounded. It took a lot of courage to even bring up this topic. Money issues are delicate, and I knew it would definitely worsen our relationship. There had been a few times before when money disappeared, but I had endured it. Isabel, after all, had fled to my house with no money due to her gambling. I didn't want to suspect her, but I couldn't help it, and Robert adamantly defended her. Having no one else to suspect, I decided to report the missing banking card to the bank. I had no intention of making a big deal out of it if she had just told me honestly, but now I had no choice. When I said I would go to the bank the next day to check the withdrawal history, Isabel, as expected, started to panic. "Don't do that. You probably just misplaced it yourself and forgot. It's better not to embarrass yourself like that," she insisted, clearly not wanting me to see the records. But with my banking card missing, that was the only way to check. Finally, Isabel gave in. "Fine, I admit it. I just borrowed a little. I was going to pay it back with my pension next month." I couldn't stay silent any longer. This was theft, and it was outrageous to report borrowing money after the fact. What made me even angrier was what followed. Hearing this, Robert laughed. "Mom, if you were in trouble, you should have just told me. Why did you buy a brand-name bag?" Isabel replied, "Well, I'm meeting old friends next week, like a reunion. I can't go looking shabby, right? So I bought it. I'll sell it after the reunion and turn it into cash." It somehow turned into a laughing matter. I couldn't find anything funny about it, mother and son taking it lightly and laughing without any apology. I had reached my limit. Our relationship had always been strained. They constantly criticized the food I cooked, and they never helped clean, yet they arrogantly complained about me being an incompetent wife. I could hear Isabel gossiping about me on the phone with her friends, badmouthing me. I no longer felt the need to defend such people. At that moment, it felt as if I had broken free from some sort of brainwashing. That night, Robert said to me, "I'll cover the cost of Isabel's bag, so don't make a big deal out of it. I know she feels bad about it." His attitude gave me goosebumps. It was so different, it made me suspect he had a split personality. I had made up my mind, I'm leaving this house. Once I decided, I knew I had to act quickly. I started looking for a job. I didn't care about their complaints anymore. To live my life my way, I had to cut ties with them. I went to the Employment Development Department to get a referral. I needed identification documents, but I didn't have a driver's license. I wasn't on Robert's insurance plan and had been paying my insurance premiums myself. I'm not proud of it, but I rarely get sick. I hadn't been to the hospital since getting married. Robert manages my insurance card, so I didn't want to ask him for it. This is because I was planning to tell him only after I'd secured a job. So I went to get my resident registration. Looking at the resident registration, I was shocked. Wait, what does this mean? My voice escaped me unintentionally. For some reason, I was still listed as unmarried. The address was correct, our current apartment, but it was originally my apartment, so there was no need for an address change. Confused by the situation, I couldn't quite understand what was happening. I impulsively asked the municipal office staff, Does this mean I'm not married? The staff responded with a troubled expression. Understandably so. They had probably never been asked such a strange question before. But once it was confirmed, the situation changed completely. I could be free. I looked over the document again and again, feeling happier each time. Could such an unbelievable miracle really happen? My life was about to begin anew. I returned home from the municipal office feeling light-footed and quickly arrived home. As soon as I got home, Isabel demanded, "I'm hungry. Make dinner quickly." I no longer needed to do that. In fact, I never needed to. But if I left right then, Isabel's lack of understanding would just be annoying, so I decided to wait until Robert came home. I served Isabel some reheated convenience food, which she ate while complaining. Everything about them felt repulsive now that I realized they were strangers to me. That night, I told them I had something to discuss and asked for their time. Robert, annoyed, said, "Emily, I'm tired from work. Can this wait for a day off? Don't make me fit into your idle schedule." Isabel chimed in, "Exactly, it's probably some trivial matter anyway. Make it quick. I don't want to waste even 5 minutes on you," glaring at me. Their attitude was only acceptable for now, but for me too, it felt like a waste of time, so I got straight to the point. "Let's get to the main topic. This house is under my contract. Both of you need to leave." They were stunned. Then Robert laughed. "Wait, Emily, did you hit your head or something? What are you talking about? You know Mom has already sold her house, right? Are you saying you'll make Mom homeless? Are you out of your mind?" He laughed, but his eyes weren't smiling. Isabel retorted, "How dare you say that? You're only able to live because Robert works, and you can't even be grateful. If that's the case, you should be the one to leave." Robert and Isabel clearly didn't grasp the situation, so I decided to explain everything from the beginning. I asked Robert, was there no issue with the marriage application? He claimed ignorance. When I revealed it wasn't processed, Isabel turned pale. But Robert still didn't understand. He said, "I think they mentioned something, but I didn't want to hear it, so I left. But it's the city hall's fault for not processing it, not mine." Again, it was his usual habit of blaming others. I couldn't deal with it anymore. Isabel then said to me, "It's not too late, right? Just submit the marriage application again. You have it, don't you?" I replied, "I have been taken for granted too much. There's no way I'm going to marry now, especially not in such a foolish way. And this apartment is in my name. You two are just parasites. That's why I'm telling you to leave." Realizing what I meant, Isabel got angry. "You are committing marriage fraud, living off my son's money while not being married. It's scary." It was all nonsensical. I told them again that this was a waste of time. Finally understanding, Robert said, "I get what Emily is saying. Maybe Mom has been too harsh on Emily. Mom should leave and we'll start over. I'll pay for Mom's moving expenses." Unexpectedly, they started falling out. Isabel retorted, "This mess is because of you, Robert. You are irresponsible. It's your fault." They started arguing. I had no interest in their family quarrel. I said, "Sorry, but this is a waste of time. I'm not blaming either of you. I just dislike you both. So could you please argue after moving out? If not, I'll leave." Upon hearing this, Isabel happily said, "You're leaving. Then Robert and I can live here, right?" Repeating her thoughtless remarks. I didn't want them to know my address anymore, so I had no intention of continuing to live there. I planned to manage with my savings for a while, so living alone wouldn't be a problem for me. The next day, I started looking for a new place and a job. When I told a friend from a previous company, they laughed and helped me out. Thanks to my friend's help, I was rehired at my previous company. The people there knew about my former husband, Robert, and the news spread quickly, even reaching his workplace. Robert was apparently disliked at his company, and the bad rumors about him spread so much that he couldn't stay there anymore. He voluntarily resigned 3 months later. The day after our big fight, I quickly found a new place and moved out. I also canceled the lease on the apartment that was in my name. Robert and Isabel left as if fleeing. Afterward, the two prideful individuals started living in a property that was beyond their means. Their lifestyle, without any savings, soon collapsed. They ended up living in a 40-year-old apartment. Losing his job made life difficult for Robert. His pride, which he had always flaunted at the company, was severely damaged. He seems to have become a recluse, probably living a life of drinking despite having no money. Once, I saw him in a grocery store parking lot, holding a can of beer. I was truly grateful that we weren't actually married. Now, they're living off Isabel's small pension. As for me, I'm now employed full-time and enjoying my work. It's a stark contrast to the days when I lived on a $100 monthly allowance. I can now invest in myself, and every day is enjoyable. I've been assigned to work on a magazine for women in their 30s. I'm so happy now, but those hellish days feel like a distant memory. Every day is fun, and it feels like a new life has started. I hope to continue living days that bring me joy. My husband always looked down on me and refused to cooperate in our married life. He would often remind me that I should be grateful to him, a high earner, while belittling me, a vocational school graduate. One day, after telling me I should appreciate what I had in him, he left home. Later, he asked if I was ready to apologize. I told him, "It's more comfortable without you." My name is Annika, and I'm 28 years old. I met my husband, Matthew, through a mutual friend. At the time, I had just graduated from vocational school in the countryside and moved to the city for work. Matthew, who was a city native, offered to show me around. "You must be lost since you're new here. Ask me anything about the place," he said. Grateful for his help, I accepted his offer, especially when I was confused about things like train transfers. Matthew guided me through the city, and I found myself increasingly drawn to him. On his days off, Matthew would take me to popular tourist spots, and we began spending weekends together. Eventually, we started having dinner after work, and it became natural for us to be together. So when he proposed, it felt like the next logical step, and soon we were married. However, after we got married, Matthew's attitude towards me began to change. He started to look down on me, asking, "You're going to keep working after we get married, right?" When I answered that I planned to, given that we had a mortgage to pay, he responded dismissively, "All right, do as you like, but don't slack off on the housework, okay?" I suggested we share the housework since we were both working, but Matthew scoffed at the idea. "Share? Unlike you, a vocational graduate, I have a responsible job. I don't have time for housework," he said. When I pointed out that I worked too, he belittled my job, comparing it to part-time work and implying I was easily replaceable. "My work is far more important than yours," he insisted. Although I disagreed, I didn't want to fight so early in our marriage. I reluctantly took on all the housework as Matthew demanded. I had been living alone for a long time, so I was used to managing household chores. But Matthew's demands only grew more unreasonable. One day, he announced that he would manage all our finances. "I'll give you a monthly allowance for living expenses," he said, handing me just $100. Shocked, I asked if this was just for food, assuming other necessities would be separate. But Matthew was firm. "That's all the money I'm giving you. You can manage with $100 as a housewife, right?" I tried to explain that $100 wasn't enough to cover food, daily necessities, and medical expenses, but Matthew dismissed my concerns. He insisted I could make it work and warned me not to skimp on meals, despite his pickiness about the menu. He would complain if I served anything less than luxurious meals, demanding expensive cuts of meat even though the budget made it impossible. When I asked if we could use some of our savings for living expenses, Matthew grew angry. "The balance is decreasing. I can't increase your allowance," he snapped. When I asked why we weren't saving as much as expected, he avoided the question, suggesting that the $100 I received was still too much. I questioned his spending habits, particularly his late nights out, suspecting it was the cause of our dwindling savings. But Matthew dismissed my concerns, saying his drinking was necessary for business relationships and entertaining. Don't criticize. It became increasingly clear that Matthew was using the money in our joint account however he pleased, without even bothering to check the details. As I looked deeper into our finances, I discovered it wasn't just his drinking habits draining our savings. He was also spending money on his hobbies, justifying it as a break from work, and doing whatever he wanted. No wonder our savings were dwindling. Hey, the money in our joint account is what we both contributed when we got married, right? Shouldn't we be saving a bit more? I asked Matthew. He snapped back, "Don't be so noisy. I'm supporting you. You should be grateful to live under a high earner like me." Matthew's salary was $1,500 a month, far from what I consider high. But in his company, he was on the higher end of the pay scale. This inflated his ego, and he convinced himself he was a high earner. "Listen," he continued, "unexpected at the company. I'm juggling many jobs, managing clients, and that's why there are so many entertaining events. It's not my fault the drinking parties have increased. It's just how it is. People are getting laid off left and right, but not me. My competence is needed by the company. His reasoning was entirely selfish, and I finally couldn't hold back any longer. Let me be clear, $1,500 isn't a high salary by today's standards. For your age, it's actually quite low. And if you're saying you're a high earner, then isn't it just that your company's salary level is low? What did you say? Matthew was furious. Also, if you're going drinking for work, the company should be covering it as an expense. It's strange that you're paying for it out of pocket. Well, it's common, isn't it? He replied defensively. And those people who quit, were they really laid off due to restructuring? I pressed. What do you mean? Matthew asked, taken aback. Well, no one explicitly said it's restructuring, but the employees are leaving regularly. Isn't it that everyone hates the company's harsh nature? The salary is low, overtime pay is minimal, and they don't even let you expense business-related drinking. It sounds like your company might be what they call a black company, don't you think? What did you say? Matthew was furious. People like you who work for low wages without questioning anything are valuable to the company in a way. But don't you think you're being used rather than being relied upon? I realized I had said too much, but it was too late. Matthew's face turned bright red, and his shoulders began to shake. You, a country bumpkin and a vocational school graduate, wouldn't understand society. $1,500 is not a low salary, you're just a sore loser. A sore loser? I saw your pay stub the other day. You only made $1,000, he said smugly. Where did you see that? I asked, shocked. The deposit statement was left on the desk. Fool, no matter how much you talk back to me, you still earn less than me. If I don't support you, you can't even live on your own, he said triumphantly. Matthew continued, this is your punishment for defying me. I'll stay at my parents' house for a while. Try living on your own. You'll understand how much you need me. Parents' house? You can't be serious, I said, watching as he quickly packed his things. I'll take both the joint account and my personal account passbooks and cards. You'll manage with just your earnings, won't you? With that, Matthew left, leaving me to live alone. Once I started living on my own, I quickly realized how comfortable it was. There was no one to complain about the menu, and I could cook whatever I wanted. Since Matthew was the one who mostly messed up the room, cleaning was a breeze. Without a husband who drank and came home late every night, I didn't have to spend extra money. Was life actually better without him? Just as I was starting to think that, Matthew called. Hey, are you alive? I thought you being so stubborn wouldn't come crying to me, so I called. Have you realized how much you need me? If you apologize now, I might come back, but you'll have to promise not to defy me anymore. You don't have to come back, I responded immediately. Huh? Matthew let out a strange noise, clearly surprised. I realized something after being away from you and being alone. It's better without you. Stop talking nonsense. How do you plan to live on your own? You can't live on $1,000, can you? What you saw wasn't my salary statement, but the amount paid for expenses. My company, unlike yours, doesn't skimp on expenses. Expenses, you say? Yes, my salary is $4,000. $4,000? How can you, a vocational school graduate, earn that much? I practiced a lot of practical work at vocational school to become immediately employable, and my company allowed me to obtain many useful certifications. Thanks to those qualifications, I received offers from companies I wanted, and I've been promoted smoothly since I joined. So I think a $4,000 salary is fair, and it's a natural result. How can you, a vocational school graduate, earn more than me, a university graduate? You always looked down on vocational school graduates, but Matthew, your university is just a 4-year institution and practically unknown, right? Bragging about being from a third-rate university just because it's a 4-year institution doesn't mean you'll be hired by a decent company. Maybe a company with harsh working conditions like yours finds you easy to handle. After all I've done to support you, how can you say that? You don't understand anything. Your salary alone couldn't possibly maintain this lifestyle. No matter how much we save on living expenses, $1,500 can't cover rent, utilities, your drinking expenses, and shopping for hobbies. If it weren't for my salary, we would have gone bankrupt long ago. You never said a word about this before, Matthew stammered. You were the one managing the account, right? I assumed you noticed. I'm surprised you had no sense of urgency, even though the balance was steadily decreasing. I didn't have time to look at that all the time. Both our salaries are our money. Yes, that's true. I didn't care who earned more as long as our savings were growing. I had no problem using my salary for our future, but it seems that my salary wasn't going into savings at all. But all that money was spent on your drinking parties and hobbies, I said, my patience finally wearing thin. I've had enough of that, and I've realized I don't need you anymore. So you don't have to come back. Wait, are you breaking up with me? Matthew's tone suddenly shifted from arrogance to desperation. But if my salary is gone, you won't be able to live, right? It was clear he was becoming frantic. Wait, don't leave me, he pleaded. His sudden change of heart was almost laughable, given how he previously boasted about supporting me. I decided to throw his own words back at him. Well, if you apologize now, I might forgive you, but you'll have to promise not to defy me anymore. I understand. I promise, Matthew stammered. Really? Yes. I'll even increase the living expenses I give you, he added desperately. I couldn't help but laugh at his offer. Give me living expenses? What are you talking about? From now on, you'll be the one doing the housework, so I don't need any living expenses. Me? Doing housework? He asked, incredulous. Yes. You said it yourself. It's only natural for the one who earns less to do the housework. Between your $1,500 and my $4,000, you as a university graduate should be able to figure out who earns less, right? From now on, I'll give you living expenses and you'll do the housework. I'll manage the finances. But housework is a woman's job, right? Matthew tried to argue, clearly struggling with the idea. Oh, are you defying me already? Planning to break the promise? I warned him, my tone firm. I'm ready to divorce any time, you know. Wait, I understand. Matthew finally conceded, agreeing to take on all the housework as I had instructed. After that, I continued making demands. Matthew, no more unpaid overtime from now on. Wait a minute, I can't finish my work without overtime, he protested. There's no need to do unpaid overtime. If you must work extra hours, make sure the company pays you for it. And also, I won't be covering your entertainment expenses anymore. What? But the only money I have to spend freely is the living expenses I get at the beginning of the month. How am I supposed to go out drinking with that? You should be able to get entertainment expenses from the company. Talk to them about that. If you go out for drinks for non-work reasons, I'll consider giving you additional social expenses. Matthew tried to negotiate with his company for overtime pay and entertainment expenses, but his efforts were dismissed. The supervisors who had once praised him with phrases like, "We rely on you," and "You're our star," suddenly turned cold. It was only then that Matthew began to realize his company was far from normal. Annika was right, he admitted to himself. They just wanted an employee who would do unpaid overtime and fund his own entertainment without complaining. Faced with this harsh reality, Matthew decided to start job hunting, but his search was unsuccessful. No company wanted to hire a third-rate university graduate with no qualifications or skills. During interviews, he was frequently told, "If only you had at least one qualification." Having failed miserably in his job search, Matthew turned to me, finally humbled. "The qualifications you have are actually amazing," he admitted. "I've always looked down on you for being a vocational school graduate, but you're far more incredible than I am. I was wrong. I'm sorry for everything." Matthew, who had once been so uncooperative and unreasonable in our married life, had completely changed. He eventually started working part-time at a nearby supermarket. "I'm not as efficient at housework as you are yet, so I chose a place where I can come home early," he said. "From now on, I'll support you from behind." "Thank you, Matthew, but I want you to continue job hunting. We can do the housework together whenever we can. Let's work as a team from now on." "But even if I keep job hunting, it's impossible for me to join a company that pays better than yours," he sighed. "Don't worry about that," I reassured him. "I was always against your idea that the one who doesn't earn does the housework. I just wanted you to understand, so I said the same thing. Matthew, why don't you look for a job you really want to do, without worrying about the money?" After that, Matthew began checking job listings and studying for qualifications during his part-time work. If I don't have any skills, I thought I'd at least get some qualifications. Anaka, can you help me with what I don't understand? Yes, of course, I agreed, happy to see this new side of him. Although our relationship had completely flipped from what it was initially, Matthew and I were getting along much better than when we were newlyweds. I found myself liking this new Matthew much more than the old one. Together, we could continue living as a couple, combining our strengths. On a freezing winter night, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I hesitated, wondering who could be visiting at such an hour. When I looked through the camera, I saw a police officer standing outside. Confused, I opened the door, and he said, "I found your child on the balcony, so I brought her here." I was bewildered by his words. "My daughter is asleep inside," I replied, still trying to process the situation. But as I looked at the little girl standing beside the officer, my shock deepened. She was about 5 years old, with blue lips and trembling from the cold. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her clothes were dirty and full of holes, clearly unwashed for some time. She looked so fragile, and I couldn't understand how she had ended up on my balcony. "My name is Janice," I explained. "I'm 32, and I live here with my husband and our 5-year-old daughter Susie." My husband, often away on business trips, had been gone for a few days, leaving Susie and me alone in our first-floor apartment. That night, as the officer stood in my doorway, I felt a deep unease. "This isn't my child," I tried to explain, but the officer seemed unconvinced. "I'm taking her to the hospital," he said firmly. The girl looked so pitiful that I hurried to grab a warm blanket, wrapping it around her shivering body. Her tiny hands were like ice, and though she bit her lips to hold back tears, I could see the fear and sadness in her eyes. I couldn't shake the image of this thin, malnourished child standing there in pain, as I wondered who she was and how she had ended up on my balcony. That night, sleep eluded me as I worried about the girl. The following morning, my husband called from his trip. "Did anything unusual happen while I was away?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, still troubled. "A strange girl was on our balcony. The police took her to the hospital." He sounded frustrated. "Why didn't you take care of her yourself?" "What could I do?" "She's a stranger," I protested, confused by his reaction. "You're a mother too," he chided. "You should have taken care of that little girl instead of handing her over to the police." His words left me baffled. How did he know she was so young? We hadn't discussed that detail. I pressed him for answers, but his explanations were vague and unsettling. "No, actually, she's the daughter of an acquaintance," he finally admitted. "Her mother is gone, and I felt sorry for her, so I brought her yesterday. I thought you would take care of her." "What?" I was stunned. "You weren't on a business trip. Explain this situation clearly." My husband apologized, but I couldn't believe he had left such a small child on the balcony in the dead of winter. Even if she had been warmly dressed, she could have frozen to death. "What are you doing, and where are you now?" I demanded. He claimed he was searching for the girl's mother, but his evasive answers made me suspicious. When he returned from his supposed business trip, he offered only brief explanations before picking up the girl from the police and leaving her with me. "Did you find her mother? What about her father?" I asked, still searching for clarity. "I haven't found them yet. As for her father, I don't know," he said, his voice evasive. "That acquaintance I mentioned, let's leave it at that. I have another business trip soon." "Wait a minute," I protested. "What about this girl?" My husband ignored my plea to stay and left, leaving the girl behind. Something about his behavior felt off, so I searched through his belongings. In the inner pocket of his suit, I found something shocking. I quickly tried to call him, but he didn't answer. As I stood there, my daughter Susie and the little girl looked up at me anxiously. "What's your name?" I asked softly. "Ashley," she answered nervously in a small voice. She was the same age as Susie, just 5 years old. When I smiled gently at her, she seemed surprised, but then she laughed cheerfully, clutching her rumbling stomach. "You must be hungry, right?" "Yes," she replied. I made Hawaiian plate lunches for Susie and Ashley. They stared at the food curiously before devouring it, eating so quickly that their faces were soon covered in sauce. When I reached out to wipe Ashley's face with a tissue, she quickly raised her hands to her head, as if to protect herself. The motion gave me an uneasy feeling. "It's all right, I'm just going to wipe your mouth," I said gently. She looked relieved and allowed me to clean her up, then continued eating with renewed enthusiasm. After finishing their meals, both girls looked completely satisfied. Seeing Ashley's dirty appearance, I decided it was time to clean her up. As I began to undress her for a shower, I gasped involuntarily. Her body was covered in countless bruises as if she had been beaten and pinched. Trying to hide my agitation, I cheerfully led her to the bathroom. As I prepared to wash her, Ashley said, "It's okay, I can do it myself," and began washing with cold water. "Wait a minute, what are you doing?" I accidentally snapped. Ashley looked up at me with a puzzled expression. "Ashley always does it like this," she said. "Washing with cold water?" I asked. She nodded, and as she tried to pour the cold water over herself, I hurriedly stopped her. I washed her entire body with warm, soapy water instead. As I poured the warm water over her, she murmured, "It's warm," with a contented look on her face. It turned out that she rarely got to shower at home, and when she did, her mother made her wash with cold water. The fact that she accepted this as normal without questioning it made my heart ache. After her bath, I dressed Ashley in Susie's clothes and neatly arranged her hair. She looked completely transformed. When Susie and Ashley stood together, they looked just like sisters. As I watched them, I couldn't help but notice how much they resembled each other, and it warmed my heart. Ashley was an obedient and gentle child, clearly longing for affection. She would come by my side as I cooked, tugging at the edge of my skirt, and when it was time for bed, she would hold my hand and never let go. Susie also grew fond of Ashley, and the two became as close as real sisters. A week passed, and I still couldn't reach my husband. Ashley's mother had said she knew him, but with so little information, I couldn't keep caring for a child without more answers. Eventually, I gave up on contacting my husband and consulted the police. Ashley was sent to a facility, and as they took her away, tears rolled down her big eyes. My heart ached as I watched her look back at me again and again. Time continued to pass without any word from my husband until I finally made a decision. 9 years later, I was living with my parents, Susie, and Ashley in our family home. I had adopted Ashley after she was taken to the facility, and my parents treated her like their own grandchild, believing she had come to us for a reason. They showered her with love. Susie and Ashley grew up as sisters, blossoming into beautiful young women. Their dream of becoming models came true, and they were now being featured as junior models in magazines, stepping into the glamorous world with vibrant expressions on their faces. One day, the doorbell rang at our family home. When I opened the door, there stood my ex-husband, Philip, looking poor and down and out. A stranger who introduced herself as Joanna was with him. Not wanting to cause a scene in front of the neighbors, I led them inside. As we sat on a living room sofa, the two abruptly began to speak. In truth, "Ashley is my child," Philip, who hadn't contacted me in 9 years, said without even apologizing. I was so stunned that I let out a big sigh. "She looks just like you. I thought it might be you. So, is that woman over there your partner?" I asked, trying to process the situation. Philip nodded and began to tell the story of how he met Joanna. She had been working part-time at a bar Philip frequently visited. Despite knowing he was married with children, they got along, and Joanna became pregnant with Philip's child, eventually giving birth to Ashley. However, Philip lacked decisiveness and didn't divorce me right away. Joanna grew tired of caring for Ashley and abandoned her role as a mother. In desperation, Philip thought of having me raise the child. It was a far-fetched plan, but what surprised me most wasn't just that. "Please give Ashley back to us." My ex-husband suddenly stood up from the sofa, making an outrageous request, almost in tears, and offered a deep apology. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I happened to see a magazine and was surprised. "She's grown up so well. Isn't she popular?" he said, his tone almost pleading. "So what? That has nothing to do with you two," I replied, my voice laced with anger. "But I am Ashley's real mother." "You're just a fake," Jonah interjected. "How dare you say such a thing without contacting me all this time?" I retorted, my patience wearing thin. Then, as if sensing my growing frustration, Philip, who had been on his knees on the floor, grabbed my leg with a pathetic look on his face. "We don't have any money and are in trouble. Ashley's our only hope. Give her back." "How awful. You plan to make her work and live off her." "No way," I shouted, feeling a surge of anger. "What? You're using Ashley to make money, aren't you? That's not fair." Philip accused, his desperation evident. Stop making false accusations. I'm saving the children's money in their bank accounts. Ashley is my child too, and I will never hand her over, I declare firmly. Suddenly, Jonah rose from the sofa, lunging at me with a reckless air that sent a shiver down my spine. What are you doing to my mom? Stop it. Ashley's voice rang out as she burst into the scene. She spread her arms wide, blocking my path, and glared at Jonah. Ashley, you've grown so beautiful. Remember me? I'm your mom. Let's go home together, Jonah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You're not my mother. Get out of this house now. Ashley screamed, tears streaming down her face as she clung to me. Although Ashley was very young at the time, it seemed she still faintly remembered the terrible treatment she had endured. Ashley, dear, that's just a misunderstanding on your part. You were so young back then, Jonah tried to explain, her words flimsy and unconvincing. In response, I pulled out a note and photograph I had found in Philip's suit back then. The note read, Asterisk, I don't want to raise a child. I can't find Ashley cute. Get rid of her somewhere. If you won't marry me, let's run away together. Asterisk. The photograph showed a young Ashley covered in bruises. I also had a hospital medical report. Do you still claim to be her parents after seeing this? I demanded, my voice cold and steady. That's, Jonah stammered, her confidence crumbling. You wanted to dump a child you didn't want to raise on me, didn't you? You made this precious child suffer such horrors, I accused. That was all Philip's doing. I didn't know anything about it. I was too young to raise a child. It was inevitable. But anyway, I'll take Ashley back now, Jonah said, her voice trembling. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. I have legally adopted Ashley, so I am her parent, I stated firmly. What? That has to be a lie. Jonah's bravado quickly deflated at the mention of the law, but Philip seemed determined not to give up yet. So, if that's the case, I'll break up with Joanna and let's start over. Susie and Ashley are my children. We'll just go back to being husband and wife. So there won't be any problem, will there? Philip proposed, his words absurd and desperate. What are you saying? You just want things to go your way. Like I will let that happen. Joanna snapped back, her anger rising. Listening to their exchange, I was first dumbfounded, then furious. I don't want to have anything to do with either of you, not even for a moment, I said, my voice filled with resolve. I have more bad news for you, Philip. You and I are no longer married. 3 years after you went missing, I filed a lawsuit and was granted a divorce. What? What are you doing on your own? Philip shouted, trying to grab me, but just then the sound of a police car approached. My parents had called the police after witnessing Joanna's aggressive behavior. The police are here now, so please don't come to our house again, I said firmly. No way. Please forgive me. I'll give up on Ashley, but at least lend me some money, Philip pleaded, putting on a disgraceful show to the very end. Afterwards, Philip and Joanna were dragged away by the police. I planned to make sure Philip paid the alimony and child support in full. The two of them, cut off even from friends and family, would likely continue to struggle. Though there had been much turmoil, the little girl who once trembled in fear had grown into a splendid young woman. I would live happily with my parents and 2 loving daughters, looking forward to the future they spoke of so full of dreams. My heart shattered when I discovered that the man I had married was a cheater. Jim and I had been together for 8 years before we finally tied the knot. We were the classic high school sweethearts who everyone thought had made it to the finish line. But our story didn't end with a happily ever after. One day, out of nowhere, I found out that Jim was cheating. The revelation came from one of his employees. My husband was a decent businessman in a small city, so for privacy, I've used fake names. I'm Riley, and you'll soon learn more about my husband Jim and my mother-in-law Tina. Jim's employee reached out to me with undeniable proof of his infidelity. I was in denial for a week, but the person who finally snapped me out of it was none other than Jim himself. He came home one evening and casually said, I want a divorce. I'll be filing soon, but I've already made the decision. I thought you should know. I don't want to be with you anymore. What? Why, Jim? I don't understand. There has to be a reason for this. I just don't love you anymore, he replied coldly. So it was true. He was having an affair. Jim's face turned ghostly white when I confronted him. He clearly hadn't expected me to find out. I don't know if he thought he could simply walk away from our marriage with some flimsy excuse. But when I revealed that I knew about his affair, he looked both shocked and angry. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not in love with you anymore, so we're divorcing. We'll split amicably and keep what's ours. You think I'll let you walk away without consequences? I shot back. I know about your affair, and I have enough proof. I don't care if you leave me for someone else. I've already wasted years on you and I'm not wasting any more. But I will go after your assets, as the prenup states. Let's not make things difficult, Riley. We don't have to strictly follow the prenup. We can sort this out between ourselves. I knew why he was so against bringing up the affair. We had a prenup in place, at his insistence. He wanted to protect himself in case of a divorce and didn't want me to cheat and get away with it. I agreed because I had no intention of cheating, and the terms seemed fair. But now Jim found himself in a bind, as he was the one who had cheated, and he was desperate to marry his mistress, who, from what I'd seen, looked like a supermodel. Good for Jim, I guess. But the affair had stripped away any love I once had for him, leaving me with nothing but rage. Jim wanted to screw me over and take what was rightfully mine, but I wasn't going to let that happen. Let me be clear about one thing, Jim. I'm going to get what's rightfully mine. I know you don't want to talk about your affair because of the prenup, but unfortunately for you, I already have a mountain of evidence against you. Damn you, Riley, why can't you just leave me alone? Let's split amicably. You were the one who insisted on the prenup, Jim. You can't fault me for trying to uphold it. And why would I let go of the opportunity to take your money? Say what you will, but I will uphold the prenup and bring up your affair. This won't end well for you, Riley. Let me be clear about that. I'll find a way to make things even. I won't let you take my money. Jim's threat hung in the air long after he left the house. I broke down in tears once he was gone, presumably off to be with his mistress. I cried from a mix of anger and heartbreak. How had I chosen such a wrong man? I had wasted years of my life loving the wrong person, but I wasn't going to let him do whatever he wanted. I needed to take matters into my own hands. So I called Tina, my mother-in-law, one of the closest people in my life. Unlike the horror stories I'd heard from others about their mother-in-laws, Tina was a gem, a woman of morals, super wealthy like her son, but the exact opposite in character. She treated everyone with love and respect. Tina was confused about why we were divorcing, and I chose not to tell her everything at first, fearing she might side with Jim. I had some unresolved childhood trauma from being abandoned by my parents, and I was scared of losing Tina too. She did her best to convince us to reconcile, not knowing what had gone wrong. Eventually, I moved out of Jim's house and got my own apartment. Tina was saddened by the situation, but more angry at Jim because he had initiated the divorce. Jim probably thought that once he told his mom everything, she would side with him. He was her son, after all. To be honest, I was afraid of that too. I loved Tina and didn't want to lose her, but she did the exact opposite. One day, Tina called me in a panic and insisted on coming over. When she arrived, she looked distraught. Riley, I need to talk to you in person. There's something I found out about Jim. I had to tell you. Is this about Jim cheating on me, Tina? Wait, you already know about that? I had no idea. It's been going on for over 6 months now, hasn't it? I got proof from one of his employees. They even sent me pictures. I found out more later, but it doesn't matter anymore. Oh God, Riley, I just found out yesterday. Jim came to me and confessed. I had no idea you two were getting a divorce. I'm so sorry, Riley. I failed to raise my son right. I feel awful. I'm a horrible mother. Tina started to cry, and my heart broke for her. None of this was her fault. She was a good mother and an amazing mother-in-law. Tina had become family to me, almost like a mother, and I started to cry with her, fearing I would lose her in the divorce as well. But what happened next dispelled my fears. Tina, please don't blame yourself. You've been nothing but kind to me. None of this is your fault. You are a good mother. No, you don't understand. There's more. I'm ashamed to even tell you about this. You'll definitely judge me and my family when I tell you. Tina, I don't think I will ever do that. Whatever Jim does is not on you. If there's anything more you want to share, you can tell me. Riley, my son has gone crazy. He's made a plan to trap you and get you arrested. What the hell? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jim was trying to get me arrested by setting me up. This was like something out of a horror movie. Had I failed to see the real Jim when I fell in love with him? Had I messed up that badly? Tina continued, Jim is planning to hide some of his cash in your new place and then call the cops on you. He says this way he can avoid losing his money and assets to you. Your prenup has a clause that states it's void if both parties are found to be at fault. That's why he's made this plan. He told you everything because he thought you wouldn't reveal his secret. I don't know how delusional he can be. Why in the world did he think I would support him? Riley, I'm on your side. What my son did, and is trying to do, is awful. I'm so ashamed. I'm so sorry. Tina, you don't have to be sorry. Thank you so much for coming to me and telling me everything despite him being your son. You truly are a good person. I don't want to lose you after the divorce. You're like a mother to me. There is no way you're getting rid of me, Tina replied firmly. I was like a daughter to Tina, and her words reassured me that I wasn't alone in this. Riley, you're family to me too. Jim can go kick rocks for all I care. Please promise me you'll protect yourself from his schemes. Don't worry, Tina, I said, feeling a surge of determination. I'm not someone to be messed with. Now that I know what Jim's planning, I'll turn his own trap against him. When I shared my plan, Tina didn't object. Instead, she looked satisfied, even relieved. With her approval, I set everything in motion. First, I ordered some surveillance cameras online. My building already had CCTV coverage in the stairwell, so I just needed to secure my apartment. With the help of a friend, I discreetly installed the cameras in every room, making sure there wouldn't be any blind spots. Then, I waited. It wasn't long before Jim showed up, pretending to discuss the divorce. I could barely contain my laughter at how transparent his excuse was, but I played along, acting as if I believed him. While I pretended to be occupied in the kitchen, I watched him head towards my study, slipping something into my desk drawer. I smiled to myself, not confronting him. Let him think he was fooling me. In reality, my cameras caught everything just as I had planned. After a few minutes of half-hearted divorce talk, Jim bolted. Good riddance. His presence was insufferable. Once he was gone, I checked the camera footage. Sure enough, there it was. Jim had planted cash in my desk. I was livid, but also grateful for Tina's warning. Without her, I wouldn't have had any proof of my innocence. I saved the footage and prepared for the next phase of Jim's plan. The next day, as expected, the cops arrived at my door, with Jim in tow. I greeted them with a smile. Hello, officers. And Jim, this is a surprise. How can I help you today? Your husband here believes you've stolen $20,000 from him, one of the officers explained. He says the money went missing after you left his house last week. I kept my composure. I don't know what Jim is talking about, officer. I didn't take any money. I would never do something like that. The officers seemed cautious, wanting to hear both sides. Jim, however, was eager to push his narrative. She's lying, officer. She's always been a thief, even when we were married. That's one of the reasons I'm divorcing her. I looked at him, feigning shock. Jim, you know that's not true. Why are you lying? Don't play innocent, Riley. I know you took my money. It was in my secret drawer until last week, and no one else has been in my house. Well, ma'am, the officer turned to me. Do you know anything about where the money might be? Jim's confidence was evident. He truly believed I was about to be arrested. But I was ready. Officers, I can show you exactly where the money is and who put it there. I have solid proof. The officers seemed intrigued. Okay, ma'am, if you have proof, we'd like to see it. We don't want to make any false arrests. Jim, growing more desperate, interjected. She's lying, officers. She's just trying to wriggle out of this. Sir, we'll handle this. Ma'am, please show us the proof. The officer replied, clearly annoyed by Jim's persistence. I led them to my desk, where the cash was hidden. Jim's smirk was infuriating. He truly believed he had won. See, officers? She had my money all along. You need to arrest her. I stayed calm. Yes, the money is here, but I'm not the one who put it there. I must inform you that I have cameras throughout my apartment. I live alone, so there's no privacy issue. I can show you exactly who placed the money in my desk. Jim's face paled at the mention of cameras. Cameras? We don't need to see any footage. The money was found in your closet. That's enough proof. The officer cut him off. We'll decide what's enough proof, sir. Ma'am, if you have the footage, we'd like to see it. Of course, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm more than happy to show you what really happened. I played the footage, and Jim's panic was palpable. He realized he had been caught, but it was too late. The cameras had captured everything. After the cops reviewed the footage, one of them turned to Jim and said, "All right, sir, we've seen the footage. It clearly shows you placing the money in her closet. It looks like you tried to set your wife up for theft." Jim's face went pale. "What are you talking about, officers? There must be a mistake. I didn't do anything. She's the one who stole the money from me." One officer responded sternly, "Sir, do you realize we can arrest you for making a false report? Your wife can also file a police report for harassment and defamation." Jim's confidence crumbled as fear replaced his smug expression. He started rambling, trying to explain away the footage, his hands shaking as he stumbled over his words. But the cops weren't buying it. After listening to Jim's excuses, the officer turned to me and asked, "Ma'am, do you want to press charges against your husband?" I could see the fear in Jim's eyes. He realized how badly he had messed up. Desperate, he turned to me, pleading, "Riley, we don't have to do this. We can handle this between ourselves. There's no reason to get the cops involved." "Why not, Jim?" I replied calmly. "You were the one who involved the cops in the first place, with no real reason. I have every right to get you arrested. You tried to destroy my reputation by framing me." Jim looked desperate. "It was a dumb mistake, Riley. I swear, I didn't mean to get you in serious trouble. I just wanted to get even in the divorce, so you wouldn't keep the prenup." I stared at him, my voice cold. "I know, Jim, I can't believe you would stoop so low. I hope your new girl is worth it, because, dear husband, you're getting arrested." Jim's face drained of color. He stammered. Turning to the officers, I said, "Yes, I'd like to press charges against my husband." The officers nodded in approval, immediately handcuffing Jim. He began to cry, pleading for mercy. It was pathetic and disgusting, but any sympathy I might have had for him was long gone. His tears and apologies meant nothing to me now. The cops led him away, and I sighed with relief. After Jim was taken away, I called Tina and told her everything that happened. She wasn't surprised, but I felt I needed to warn her about the potential fallout. "Tina, he'll get bail soon, and he might turn to you when he's out. There's a chance he'll suspect you had a hand in this." "I'm prepared for that," she replied confidently. "If he dares to come to my house, I'll tell him exactly what I think, and I'll let him know I was the one who informed you of his plan." "Are you sure, Tina? Jim will be furious. He might cut you off completely." "But for me," she said, without hesitation. "I don't want any connection with him. I'm done with Jim. If he gets mad at me for doing the right thing, that's his problem. Besides, I'm rethinking a few things, like my will." "What are you planning to do?" I asked, concerned. "I'm going to disinherit him," Tina declared. "I don't want a homewrecker getting his hands on my money, and I can't forgive my son for trying to ruin your life. I'm done with him." I couldn't hold back the tears after hearing Tina's words. Knowing someone in this world was willing to stand up for me meant everything. Tina comforted me and even promised to take me on a trip once the divorce was finalized. As for Jim's arrest, not much came of it legally. I didn't sue him. Instead, I used the threat of charges to push the divorce through quickly. Because of his arrest and infidelity, the prenup was upheld and I ended up with over 70% of our assets. Jim lost a significant amount of money and had to cover my legal fees as well. By the end of it, he was left traumatized by his own schemes. Jim's affair partner, the woman he thought loved him, left him after realizing he had lost money to me. Their relationship quickly soured, adding a bitter end to Jim's failed plans. Tina and Jim are no longer on speaking terms. At family events, they don't acknowledge each other. After news of the divorce, the affair, and his arrest spread, Jim lost the respect of many family members who found his behavior unforgivable. He's now estranged from several relatives. Tina and Jim had one final argument where she told him she was disarming him. Jim was devastated. He lost his mother, his wife, and his mistress in just a few months. Now he's all alone, trying to rebuild his savings and reputation. As for me, I'm in the best stage of my life. The divorce made me wealthier, and as promised, Tina and I took a trip to Hawaii. It was a wonderful time to bond and relax. It's been a year since the divorce, and we're planning another trip to Spain next month. I haven't started dating again, as I'm focusing on my mental health with the help of a therapist. Life is good, and I'm taking the time to heal, relax, and learn to be on my own again. Hello everyone, my name is Winter, and my husband Kyle is helping me share our story with you. Like many of you, I've had my share of challenges with a difficult mother-in-law. These events took place before Kyle and I got married. But for simplicity, I'll refer to his mom, Holly, as my mother-in-law. Kyle's dad, Archie, also plays a role in this story, but rest assured, he's a genuinely good guy. When I first started dating Kyle, Holly disapproved of our relationship. She's a rather greedy woman and didn't appreciate my simple lifestyle. She was outright rude to me and even attempted to sabotage our relationship several times. Thankfully, Kyle was well aware of her nature and didn't let her meddle in our relationship. Things took a turn when Holly discovered that I come from a wealthy family. My father is a successful businessman, and while we have a lot of money, we don't flaunt it or live a lavish lifestyle. When Holly found out the truth, she suddenly became very friendly. However, I kept my distance because I've always had a distaste for people who cozy up to the wealthy just to gain something from them. Unfortunately, Holly turned out to be one of those people. When Kyle and I got engaged, his parents were overjoyed, especially Holly. She seemed thrilled about our engagement and said, "Wow, Kyle, I must say I'm really impressed with you. You managed to snag such a wealthy girl like Winter." Kyle, unimpressed, replied, "Seriously, Mom, that's what you have to say. Her wealth is the only thing that caught your eye." "Oh no, I'm sure Winter is a nice girl too, but her wealth really makes her an exception. I'm so happy you two got engaged. Actually, I was thinking about hosting a party to announce your engagement. I want to tell the world that my son is engaged. What do you think, Archie?" Archie agreed, "Yeah, I'd like to organize a party too. Consider it a small engagement celebration on our end. You don't have to spend any money, we'll arrange everything. It will be a great way to introduce Winter to everyone before the wedding." Kyle and I thought it was a good idea. "I think that's a great idea," I said. "It would be difficult to talk to everyone on the day of the wedding, and through this party, I'll be able to get to know a lot of people better. It sounds exciting." Kyle added, "I agree with Winter. It does sound exciting. Count us in. I'll be happy to introduce my fiancé to everyone." However, I had my doubts about Holly's enthusiasm. While Archie's intentions were good, Holly seemed a little too excited about the party. To make matters worse, my dad had discovered something unsettling about Holly, and I was torn about what to do with that information. It wasn't something I could easily ignore, but I wasn't sure if I should act on it. As the date of the party approached, my anxiety grew. I wasn't sure how to handle the situation until one day, I received a text from Holly that infuriated me. She demanded, "Just so you know, you need to bring a nice gift to this party. It will be a great way to step into our family. You need to show your status to everyone by bringing an expensive gift and giving it to me." "What? But why, Holly? I thought this was just a party to announce our engagement and upcoming marriage. I didn't know I was supposed to bring a gift." Kyle didn't mention anything about this. Kyle is clueless and doesn't know the etiquette. "We're throwing you a big party, Winter. Since you come from a rich family, the least you can do is bring an expensive gift. And mind you, it better be the most expensive thing I've ever laid my eyes on. I'll know if you try to be cheap, and I won't accept a measly gift from someone who's marrying my son." "I still don't understand what an expensive gift has to do with me marrying your son. Why should I give you a gift to marry Kyle? Shouldn't you be the one giving me and Kyle a wedding present?" "Stop trying to be clever, Winter. You think you're so smart, but you're just a bimbo. I'm only allowing my son to marry you because you're rich. So if you want to make sure your marriage works out, you better keep me happy. So you're saying that if I don't give you an expensive gift, you'll try to ruin my marriage. You can bet on it, Winter. And I don't want just any expensive gift. I want the most expensive gift you can buy. Keep that in mind when you go shopping, and don't give me a reason to ruin your and my son's happiness." I was stunned. Never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined my soon-to-be mother-in-law threatening to ruin my marriage if I didn't give her an expensive gift. She made the demand with such confidence, as if it were her birthright, acting like Kyle was only marrying me because she allowed it. The most shocking part was that Kyle had no idea about Holly's demands, which was evident from her tone. If Holly thought she could intimidate me into doing as she pleased, she was dead wrong. But I wasn't about to let Holly know that. I simply replied, "Okay then, Holly. If a good gift is so important to you, I'll make sure to bring you one. and I promise it will be the most expensive gift you'll ever receive." There, that wasn't so hard, was it? Holly smirked. "Keep up this good behavior, and I can guarantee your marriage will last. To stay in this family, you need to keep me happy, not Kyle. He usually does what I say, so mind that." "I'll keep that in mind, Holly," I said. "Thanks for letting me know about this gift business beforehand. It gives me plenty of time to arrange for the best." "Well, you better start working on it fast. I'll give you some hints. I usually prefer Cartier over Tiffany, but as long as it's one of a kind, I'll be happy. People need to know how well my son is marrying. God, they'll be so jealous. Anyway, see you at the party, Winter. Bye." With that, Holly was off, probably already dreaming about the most expensive gift she was going to get. Her call had ended my dilemma. I wasn't going to stay quiet about what I knew. This was the perfect opportunity to one-up Holly in the best way possible. But first, I needed Kyle on my side. He knew his mom was greedy, so I doubted he'd object to my plans, but I still needed to tell him everything and get his confirmation. That night, as soon as Kyle got home from work, I pulled him aside. He was a little confused about what was so urgent, but he didn't protest much. I sat him down and showed him the texts I'd exchanged with Holly. As he read through them, his face turned red with anger. "That's it," he said, fuming. "This woman has really crossed all limits today. God, I'm so embarrassed. Winter, I'm so sorry my mom talked to you this way. I swear I would have proposed to you even if she didn't approve." "Don't worry, Kyle," I reassured him. "Your little warning about Holly had me prepared for this. Plus, I know you really love me and won't drop me just because your mom tells you to. You're in the clear." "Mom has truly become a very greedy woman," Kyle said, shaking his head. "I mean, I know she can be demanding, but this is a whole new level of entitlement. I think we should talk to Dad about this. He wouldn't tolerate her disrespecting you." "Actually, I don't think that would be enough for me," I replied. "I have something else to tell you, Kyle. I was on the fence about what to do with this information, but Holly solved the dilemma for me. It's about her, and I think you should know." I went ahead and told Kyle everything I knew about Holly's affair. As I spoke, his expression shifted from shock to fury. He had no idea what the true face of his mother was, but once he knew, he immediately agreed to take part in the plan I had in mind. Now, let me reveal what was really going on with Holly. She had been cheating on Archie. Her affair partner was a wealthy man my father knew well. For the past year, Holly had been sleeping with this man to get expensive gifts and vacations from him. Archie had no clue. He thought her trips were to visit a sick sister, but in reality, she was touring the world with this guy. Kyle and I decided to gather evidence. Since we both have good incomes, we hired a private investigator to follow Holly and collect proof of her affair. The investigator was skilled and provided us with incriminating photos and details. Holly's days of manipulating people were numbered, and Kyle and I were determined to see to that. We didn't reveal anything until the day of the party. Holly had tried her best to organize a posh event, but it was clear she had no real experience in planning something of this scale. When Kyle and I arrived, his parents greeted us, each with different expressions. Archie was excited to celebrate our engagement, while Holly seemed eager to see what I was carrying with me. "Oh my God, here come the two very special people in my life," Holly announced loudly. "The life of the party is here, everyone. As you all know, my son Kyle is marrying this wonderful woman, Winter. I'm so happy to announce their engagement today. Welcome to the family, Winter. I hear you have something to present to us as a welcome gesture." "That's right," I replied. "I have a nice gift for both you and Archie. Why don't you two open it together? Or would you like to go first, Holly?" "Oh, I would love to be the first," Holly said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Archie isn't that into gifts, you know." "Winter, you really didn't have to bring us anything," Archie said kindly. "It's a special day, Holly," I said, handing her the gift. "I had to make it memorable, so I got the perfect gift for you, and for Archie as well. Go ahead, open it." Holly eagerly took the velvet box, expecting some luxurious jewelry, but as she opened it, her face went pale. She looked at me, then back at the box, her eyes wide with shock. Everyone around us was curious to know what she had received, especially since Holly had likely bragged about the expensive gift she was expecting. "What's the matter, Holly?" I asked innocently. "Don't you like my gift?" "I know you suggested Cartier, But you also mentioned it should be the most expensive gift you've ever laid eyes on. I got you exactly that. What are you talking about, Winter? Kyle asked, looking confused. Holly told you to give her a gift. Yes, I said. She texted me saying I needed to bring her a nice gift, the most expensive gift ever, she said. If I didn't comply, she threatened to ruin our marriage. Holly, you said that to Winter? Archie demanded, his voice rising in anger. Why the hell would you do that? And Winter, you should have come to me about this. You didn't need to bring her a present. Actually, I bought this for you, Archie, I said. I think you should see it, and I'd be glad if you would show everyone what I got her. Archie, now suspicious, ordered Holly to hand over the box. She hesitated, but his stern gaze left her no choice. Reluctantly, she handed it to him. As Archie opened the box, his eyes widened in horror. Inside were several photos of Holly kissing and making out with her affair partner. I had also included other proof of their romantic trips that the investigator had sent us. What the hell is this, Holly? Archie shouted. Are you freaking cheating on me? Answer me. Aye. It's not what it looks like, Holly stammered, trying to pull away. Then what is it like, Holly? These pictures are as clear as day. How do you explain this? Kyle stepped in. Dad, I don't think she has the face to accept her own sins in front of everyone. We hired a private investigator and found the truth. Winter's father warned her about seeing Mom with one of his colleagues. I'm sorry, Archie, I said gently. I didn't want you to find out like this. But I think it's important for everyone to see Holly's true colors, I said firmly. She's been playing you, Archie. She's been sleeping with another man and accepting money and gifts from him. We have all the proof. Archie stared at me in disbelief while the room fell silent. The whispers began as people pieced together the truth. Remember how Mom used to visit her sick sister for days? Kyle added, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Well, Dad, Aunt Felix is fine. Those trips, they were vacations with her affair partner. Archie scanned the evidence, his face reddening with rage. The crowd around us shifted uncomfortably, their expressions turning to disgust as they realized the extent of Holly's betrayal. Everyone knew Holly was greedy, but this was beyond anything they could have imagined. Even Archie couldn't overlook this. How dare you betray me like this, Holly? Archie's voice was thick with emotion. 30 years of marriage and you threw it all away for what? Some material things. How could you be so greedy? And to threaten your son's marriage if she didn't shower you with expensive gifts. What is wrong with you? Holly, now pale and trembling, tried to backtrack. Archie, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. A small one. Please don't react this way. I swear, it's over. I ended it recently. Recently? Archie retorted, his voice rising. Then why do these pictures have recent timestamps? You told me you were visiting your sister just last month. We called Aunt Felix and she said you never even came to see her. She wasn't sick. Kyle chimed in, Yeah, Mom, Aunt Felix is pretty pissed at you. Expect some angry calls soon. Realizing she was cornered, Holly's tears began to flow as she desperately tried to win back Archie's favor. Archie, I know I made a terrible mistake, but it meant nothing to me. Please don't do anything drastic. I really love you, and I'll cut all ties with him. I swear. Don't swear for nothing, Holly, Archie replied coldly. I won't believe your lies anymore. I had my doubts about you, but I never thought you'd cheat on me. Your greed has destroyed everything. Do you really think I'll stay with you after this? Archie, please, Holly begged. We've been married for 30 years. You can't just throw it all away over nothing. Nothing. Archie spat, his voice laced with bitterness. You broke our vows, Holly. You don't get to tell me what I should do. I'm divorcing you. You wanted an expensive gift from Winter, right? Well, she gave you the most expensive gift of all, your entire marriage. Good luck, Holly. You'll need it to pay your lawyer's fees. With that, Archie stormed into the house, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. The guests quickly followed suit, their disapproving gazes lingering on Holly before they departed. No one wanted to stay after what had unfolded. As Kyle and I prepared to leave, Holly turned her anger on me. Winter, you witch. How dare you destroy my marriage? You had no right. Just like you had no right to threaten mine, I replied coolly. You wanted an expensive gift, and I gave you one. It just happened to cost you everything. You're a horrible woman, Winter. Holly screamed, her voice shaking with fury. This is all your fault. If Archie divorces me, I won't spare you. Just wait. Stop threatening my fiancé, Mom. Kyle interjected, his tone icy. You've lost all shame after wrecking your own marriage. How dare you try to extort gifts from Winter by threatening us? She did the right thing, and Dad is doing the right thing too. As for me, I'm done with you. You're uninvited from the wedding. Don't bother showing up or you'll be kicked out. Holly was a sobbing, incoherent mess by this point, desperately trying to find a way to fix the situation. But Kyle and I had had enough. We turned and walked away, leaving her behind. The next day, Holly showed up at our door, looking desperate. Archie had kicked her out and was already consulting a lawyer about the divorce. With a postnuptial agreement in place, Holly was left with nothing. We live in an at-fault state, so there was no way for her to claim any money or assets from Archie. She had never worked a day in her life and didn't have the funds to hire a lawyer or support herself. Her affair partner had dumped her the moment she told him she was caught. He didn't want a woman like her latching onto him, especially when he had never intended to marry her. With little money and no marriage, Holly was stuck. I truly had given her the best gift ever. Archie moved forward with a divorce, ignoring Holly's pleas. When she showed up at our door, we turned her away and blocked her on all platforms. We even hired security to ensure she couldn't crash our wedding. Our wedding day went off without a hitch. Security did their job, throwing Holly out when she tried to enter the venue. She screamed about how we couldn't do this to her, but we didn't hear a word of it. We were too busy enjoying our special day, with only secondhand accounts from others filling us in later. As far as I know, Holly fled to her sister Felix in another state. Felix refused to house her for more than a month. Now, Holly works as a Walmart employee and lies in a trailer. Meanwhile, Kyle and I are enjoying our marital bliss, supporting his father as he recovers from the betrayal. It seems Holly will be staying far away from us from now on. My name is Leah, and I met my husband Curtis in college at a party that a friend invited us to. We started spending more time together, going on outings and grabbing meals. Over time, we grew closer. Curtis made the first move, and I found myself drawn to his kindness. We began dating, but recently, strange things started happening. Trash appeared in my apartment mailbox, and I began receiving anonymous phone calls that would hang up as soon as I answered. I talked to Curtis about it and even changed my phone number. But the calls continued on the new one. It started to wear me down emotionally. One day, Curtis invited me to a fireworks show. I wasn't in the mood because of the stress. But he encouraged me, saying, "Don't look so down. You'll ruin the fireworks. Cheer up, you'll feel better." He was right. I decided to enjoy the moment. As the beautiful fireworks lit up the sky, Curtis suddenly shouted, "Leah, look." The next set of fireworks spelled out, "Leah, will you marry me?" The people around us began murmuring, and Curtis gave me the biggest smile. "I want you to be happy forever, Leah. Let's always be together." I couldn't hold back my tears. "Thank you, Curtis. I'm so happy. Please make me happy." Curtis smiled, acknowledging the congratulations from those around us. Curtis's dad is a prominent real estate agent, and Curtis is the vice president of the company, so I, a country girl, joined the world of the rich and famous. We moved into a luxury apartment owned by his dad and decided to build our own house, which was completed in just 2 months. Our new home was spacious, with white walls and a lovely scent of wood. Then one day, Curtis said, "Nicole and Garrett are coming over this Sunday to celebrate our move. Sorry for the short notice." I was surprised. "What? We just moved in 2 days ago, and we're not even unpacked yet." But okay. To be honest, I wasn't fond of Nicole, my sister-in-law. When we announced our engagement, she looked unhappy. She got married 6 months later and wore a white dress to our wedding, sticking close to Curtis and stealing the spotlight. But I decided to make the best of it. On Sunday, as I was making homemade pizza, the video doorbell rang. "Oh, Nicole's here. Isn't she supposed to come at 12? It's only 11. I rushed to the door, but Nicole was already heading to the living room without a greeting, passing by me as if I wasn't there. "Curtis, I brought a housewarming gift. Open it." I tried to be polite. "Nicole, it's been a while since the wedding. At least say hello." Nicole reluctantly greeted me and handed over a box. "Thanks. Let's see what's inside." It was a glass photo clock with a picture of Curtis and Nicole. I felt uneasy. Normally, the photo should be of the married couple, not siblings. But Nicole insisted. Who cares? You're always with Curtis, I hardly see him. Let me have this. She moved our wedding photo and placed the clock in a prominent spot. I pretended not to notice. Nicole then said she wanted to see the rooms and went upstairs, pulling Curtis along, while her husband Garrett was left standing, looking at his phone. Are you working? Please have a seat. He apologized, sorry, and sat down. I prepared the meal and set the table. The food's ready, please eat while it's hot. Nicole came over and said, oh, I forgot, I brought some meat. Let's have a barbecue. I was stunned, a barbecue in our new home. The smell would permeate the whole house. But Curtis seemed unfazed. Nicole, that's some quality meat. Let's have a barbecue, Leah. I forced a smile. I'm sure it looks delicious. I forced a smile. Great, it's a nice brisket, right? I've already invited Mom and Dad. Let's all have a fun barbecue party. Who does she think she is, taking over our house like this? I was getting angry at Nicole's audacity, but I held back since my in-laws were coming over. When everyone gathered, I took the opportunity to serve my homemade pizza. As I placed the hot pizza on the table, Nicole pushed her plate aside and laid out her meat, vegetables, and drinks instead. Thankfully, my mother-in-law took a slice. Leah, this pizza is wonderful. Try some, dear, she said to my father-in-law. He agreed. This is really good. You could open a restaurant, Leah. I love your special pizza. Nicole looked displeased as she took a bite of the pizza. It tastes like old-school pizza. Rustic, right? Don't you think so, Garrett? She said, catching him off guard. Garrett hesitated, then replied, it has a nostalgic taste, I guess. I distanced myself from Nicole and started grilling meat near my in-laws. Leah, let us handle this. You should eat, they insisted. Thank you, but I'll eat later. Please, go ahead, I replied. Nicole, however, continued to boss me around without mercy. Leah, could you grill that meat over there? And we're running low on beer. Sure, but it looks like we're out of beer. I'll go buy some, I offered. No, I'll go, Curtis interjected. No, Curtis, we're all together for the first time in a while. Leah, please go, Nicole insisted. Reluctantly, I went to the nearby supermarket as Nicole instructed and hurried back home. When I returned, Garrett was on the phone near the entrance. I can't make it today. I'll go tomorrow, he said before noticing me and going inside. Sorry for the wait, here's the beer, I said as I handed it to Nicole. Thank you, Leah. Why don't you sit down and eat? She suggested, seating me and placing some grilled corn on my plate, which I reluctantly ate. That was delicious. I'm full. How about you, Leah? Nicole asked with a provocative tone. She had been treating me like a maid, and I hadn't even had any brisket, just corn. I managed to hold back my boiling anger. Didn't we save some meat for Leah? Curtis asked. Oh, was that for Leah? I grilled it and ate it. Nicole responded casually. It's fine, as long as everyone had fun. That's what matters. Don't worry about it, I said, swallowing my frustration. Nicole then brought something from her car. Since I ate your meat, here you go, she said, handing me a bag. Thank you, I replied. Inside was a supermarket sandwich and the bread was already stale. Still, I held back my frustration. Curtis, sensing the tension, said, Leah, sorry for dropping by unannounced. Come visit us sometime, we're leaving now. Sure, we'll come over with Curtis next time. Let's all go out for some good food, I replied. Yes, looking forward to it, Nicole added. But despite my in-laws leaving, Nicole and Garrett showed no signs of leaving. Curtis, let's all play a game of cards, Nicole suggested. I called Curtis into the bedroom. Sorry, I'm not feeling well. Can we ask Nicole and the others to leave? Are you okay? I'll tell them. You rest for a bit, Curtis said before going out to speak to Nicole and the others. Leah's not feeling well, so we'll have to call it a day. Sorry. Sure, Leah must be tired. So we're leaving already. Why don't the three of us go to a club? Nicole suggested, but Garrett intervened. Nicole, let's go home for today. We'll do it another time. How about we visit your apartment next week? Our place is a mess. Let's go out for dinner next week, Curtis suggested. Okay. We'll leave for today. Thanks for having us, Nicole said as they hurriedly left. After they were gone, I asked Curtis, why aren't Nicole and Garrett married yet? I actually don't know. I didn't even know Nicole was dating Garrett, but it's surprising they decided to get married right after we did, Curtis replied. I became curious about Nicole and Garrett. They didn't act like a couple today, and Nicole mostly talked to Curtis. And what was that phone call Garrett made? I decided to rest for the day since I was tired. The next day, Curtis suggested we go out for dinner. Feeling better, I drove to a department store to buy some clothes. As I was about to open my car door in the parking lot, another car pulled in next to me. Garrett was in the driver's seat, and a woman, not Nicole, was in the passenger seat. They were chatting happily. Is Garrett cheating? Such a nice guy. I discreetly left my car and went into the department store. I couldn't get it out of my head and ended up not buying anything. When I got home, I waited for Curtis. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. I don't like Nicole, but she's still Curtis's sister, so it bothered me. When Curtis came home, we headed to the restaurant. I was so preoccupied that I hardly ate. Leah, you're not eating much. Not hungry? Curtis asked. I'm going to the restroom, I said, getting up. As Curtis went to the restroom, his phone buzzed in his bag. Curious, I peeked at it. It was a text from Nicole. Leah is definitely cheating. I saw her with another man. Leah, and you are not a good match. Let's all live together again. You are being deceived by Leah. Nicole was making things up. It seemed she texted him daily. I was angry at myself for worrying about Nicole. Curtis returned from the restroom, picked up his phone and handkerchief, and looked serious. Leah, there's something I've been wanting to ask. Are you cheating on me? Nicole said she saw you with another man. I'm not cheating, Curtis. Where were you? Today, I went to the department store to look at clothes. Did you buy anything? Curtis asked. No, I didn't find anything I wanted. I replied, but Curtis seemed doubtful. He stayed silent during dinner and went straight to our room without saying a word. The next morning, he was still quiet at breakfast. Curtis, are you misunderstanding something? I asked, trying to break the tension. It was clear Curtis was influenced by Nicole's text, my sudden outing, and the fact that I returned without buying anything. I couldn't stand the thought of our marriage crumbling because of Nicole's meddling. A wave of anger and frustration that I'd been holding back surfaced, and I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. I decided to confront Nicole directly to clear up the misunderstanding. I went to Nicole's apartment and rang the doorbell. Garrett appeared on the video monitor. It's Leah. Is Nicole there? Huh? She's out right now. Sorry you came all this way, Garrett said. Is that so? Garrett, can I come in? I have something to ask, I pressed. The place is a mess. I'll come to you. What's this about? Garrett hesitated before letting me in. The room was bare, without even a table, and felt uninhabited. Nicole and I aren't actually married, Garrett revealed, surprising me. We haven't even applied for a marriage license. We live separately even though we share a room. Then who was the woman in the parking lot? I asked. That's my sister. I've always loved her, and our parents started to suspect our relationship. I began posting on a website to vent my stress. Did you meet Nicole there? Yes, we realized we were in similar situations and decided to have a sham marriage, Garrett explained. That's why you didn't have a wedding. I concluded. Yes, Nicole loves Curtis, not as a brother, but as a man. She's been trying to break you two up. Even I don't know how to handle her behavior. Nicole has always seen Curtis as more than just an older brother. I returned home and invited Nicole over for dinner by phone. She arrived when Curtis was supposed to be home. Curtis is working late today, I said. Then I'm leaving, Nicole responded, but I stopped her. I heard from Garrett. You two are in a sham marriage and you've been trying to break Curtis and me up. You texted Curtis that I was cheating, didn't you? So what? Curtis is mine. I won't give him to anyone. I've been getting rid of nuisances like you, Nicole retorted. Just then, Curtis, who had been hiding, stepped between us. Nicole, stop. Is this all true? Curtis, you're here? You said you were working late. You lied, Nicole exclaimed. I invited Nicole here today because I wanted to hear the truth from her. But I'm disappointed. Nicole, apologize to Leah, Curtis demanded. Nicole glared at me in silence. If you can't apologize after hurting someone I care about, I'll stop being your brother today. If you really care about me, don't take away my happiness. Nicole broke down, crying. I feel like I've hit my head against the wall and regret everything I've done, she sobbed. I can't forgive you right away, but I understand how you feel. Please find your own happiness. When this baby is born, I want you to be happy too. I told her. Leah, you're pregnant? Curtis asked, looking genuinely happy. I wasn't feeling well lately, so I went to the hospital today, I explained. Curtis's face lit up with joy. Nicole came over and deeply apologized. I'm really sorry for everything, she said before leaving our home in tears. Months later, our family grew and we're living happily. I don't know where Nicole is now, but after the baby was born, we received a letter from her. It contained a congratulatory message and a photo of Curtis and me smiling. Seeing that photo, I felt that Nicole had finally accepted me. Despite everything, I feel truly happy now. From now on, I want to live a joyful life full of smiles with our family of 3. Emily, is Grandpa behaving himself? Oh yes, well sort of. He injured his leg. Old people can be such a nuisance sometimes. I wish they'd think about those of us who have to take care of them. Patricia, that's not a nice thing to say. It's fine, he's already declining quite a bit. I can't handle the fuss of old people, but you're used to it, so you'll be fine. The other day, my husband's grandfather, Michael, fell in a garden and injured his leg. It's not a serious injury, but he's already 82 years old. Because of his age, we've had him rest in bed just to be safe so it doesn't get worse. My mother-in-law won't even go near him, let alone take care of him. I'm Emily, 30 years old. I got married 3 years ago and live with my husband Daniel's family. My husband was my boss at the company where I worked, a company founded by his grandfather. When I joined 8 years ago, my father-in-law was already the president and my grandfather-in-law was the chairman. But back then, the grandfather was still handling all the important tasks and responsibilities of the company. 2 years ago, when Grandpa turned 80, he remained chairman but handed over most of the public duties to my father-in-law. Michael, you've worked hard all this time. Now leave the company matters to Christopher and take it easy, my mother-in-law said with a smile. But her words sounded sarcastic to me. Grandfather-in-law is a bit stubborn, but a fair and kind person with a good reputation. In contrast, my father-in-law seemed somewhat immature, never expressing his opinions clearly and utterly unreliable compared to Grandpa. And he always does whatever my mother-in-law says. My grandmother-in-law has already passed away, and I never met her. My husband and I started dating when we worked together on the same product planning team, 3 years after I joined the company. My husband, who was energetically leading the team, seemed reliable to me, though a bit self-righteous. Maybe I felt that way because I lost my father early and grew up with just my mother. My mother also passed away from illness 2 years ago, and now I have no family other than my in-laws. Shortly after I got married, my mother fell ill and needed care, so I quit my job to take care of her. The fact that my husband's family didn't object was probably due to a single comment from Grandpa. It's only natural to take care of the mother who raised you alone. Don't worry and take good care of her. Thanks to that, I was able to be by my mother's side every day for a year, without financial worries, until she passed away. My mother-in-law seemed a bit dissatisfied, but I was truly grateful. However, since Grandpa handed over the company to my father-in-law, everyone's attitudes towards him have gradually changed. They no longer listen to his opinions as much, and I can't shake the feeling that they're treating him carelessly. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but watching my mother-in-law and husband's behavior, I can't help but feel that way. My father-in-law's attitude is non-committal, but it feels like he's ignoring Grandpa, as if he's no longer needed since he's practically retired. Watching my in-laws' behavior makes me feel somewhat angry. Hey, don't you think your attitude, Patricia, and yours too, is a bit cold towards Grandpa? So what's the big deal? Grandpa tries to talk to you, and you barely respond. You don't even try to help him. Like I have time to deal with old people. You can take care of Grandpa. You're the one with the free time. You don't have to talk like that. Quiet, I'm tired from work. Don't nag me about unnecessary things. This is how it goes. No matter what I say, they won't listen to me. My grandfather-in-law doesn't say anything to his family about this. Now, I'm the only one who talks to my grandfather-in-law at home. Grandpa, the weather is nice today. Shall we go for a little walk outside? Your leg seems to be healing well, and I think it will be good rehabilitation. Thank you. Let's go out for a bit then. The two of us went to the park. There were several families with children playing around. My grandfather-in-law looked at the scene with joy. Christopher and Daniel were like that too at times, he said. Grandpa, I was busy with work and couldn't take care of the children much. Maybe that's why I couldn't raise Christopher and Daniel properly, he said, with a slightly sad face, almost like he was talking to himself. Christopher is my father-in-law, and Daniel is my husband. I think about how everyone could be kinder to my grandfather-in-law, but I can't come up with a good idea. But then my in-laws suggested building a house for my grandfather-in-law. This house is over 50 years old, right? The layout is bad. It's hard to use. But instead of spending money on repairs, it would be better to build a new house in a more convenient location. A new house. Michael is getting older, and it's good that he only got injured last time, but we never know what will happen. So let's make the house barrier-free so we won't have trouble if care is needed. I see. We can even put Michael's room in the middle, so everyone can take care of him easily. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Right, so it's settled then. And Michael, about the cost. If it's a house for all of us, I'll take care of it. Talk to Mr. Jones about the money. Typical Michael. Thank you, we appreciate it. My mother-in-law smiled happily. It seems to me that they only flatter him when they want money. But if everyone takes care of my grandfather-in-law after moving to the new house, I thought there could be nothing better. Mr. Jones is the company's in-house counsel and also manages my grandfather-in-law's personal assets. My grandfather-in-law liked his character and made him in-house counsel, and it's been nearly 30 years. He is 58 now and the person my grandfather-in-law trusts the most. I've met him several times, and he seems to be a very honest person. He always cares about my grandfather-in-law's health, and sometimes I think he's more like a son than his real sons. Having such people around my grandfather-in-law makes me feel a little relieved. However, I wasn't informed about where or what kind of house was being built, but my mother-in-law seemed very cheerful. The three of them were looking at interior design magazines and discussing various ideas, so it appeared everything was going smoothly. Then something unexpected happened. It was revealed that my grandfather-in-law had a debt of $1.82 million. Wait, what's this about $1.82 million? My grandfather-in-law had become a co-signer for a loan taken out by a friend's company. Unfortunately, the company fell into financial trouble, and the debt became my grandfather-in-law's responsibility. Wait, they're not going to take the house that's under construction, are they? Since the contract has already been completed, and as Patricia said, it's in the president's name, so it's fine, my mother-in-law replied, clearly relieved. Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad we did it my way. Listening to that conversation, I learned for the first time that the new house was in my father-in-law's name, even though my grandfather-in-law had paid for it. Putting it in my father-in-law's name was just like something my mother-in-law would do. I also couldn't understand why they didn't consider selling the house to help repay the debt. Hey, this debt is Michael's fault, and it has nothing to do with us or the company, right? Well, it was signed in Michael's name. Oh, good, then there's no problem. I couldn't comprehend what was good about it, but since my grandfather-in-law remained silent during the conversation, I didn't intervene either. After all, it's not an amount I could handle. But a few days later, my grandfather-in-law's behavior began to change gradually. Grandpa, what would you like to eat for lunch? Who are you calling Grandpa? I'm only 50. You have no right to call me that. Huh? Sorry, Emily, right? I was lost in thought. At first, I thought you was just deep in thought, but when it happened repeatedly, I began to feel uneasy. Patricia, what are you doing? Where's my meal? Grandpa, I'm Emily. Patricia is your daughter-in-law. You already ate your meal earlier. I didn't eat. Are you trying to starve me? I wondered if my grandfather-in-law's condition was triggered by the $1.82 million debt, and if seeing that none of his family members were trying to help him might have been a double shock. What could I do for him? I tried to take my grandfather-in-law to the hospital, but he refused to go. He might not want to admit that he might have dementia. I didn't want to force him, but I felt helpless on my own. I consulted my husband, but he only replied that it had nothing to do with him. I couldn't rely on my mother-in-law either, so I thought my father-in-law was the only option. Yeah, I heard from Patricia and Daniel. They think it might be dementia. Can you go to the hospital with us? But it's not that bad yet, right? If we go to the hospital, others will find out my father has dementia. There are good medications now that can slow the progression. Well, there's no need to rush. Let's watch him a little longer. Emily is here, so it'll be fine, right? I couldn't help but think how unreliable these people were. I realized I couldn't depend on them. Grandpa, let's go to the hospital. Let's get you properly examined. Who are you? Where are you planning to take me? You're up to no good. I almost cried, thinking about how my once kind grandfather-in-law had become so stubborn. But my mother-in-law just laughed, amused. Even if he was the chairman, it's over for him now. But now, everything, even the company, is all Christopher's. Patricia, Grandpa isn't completely unaware. He's listening to everything. He'll forget everything soon. He'll start wandering and dribbling. Just thinking about it gives me chills. He's nothing but a nuisance now. How can you say that? Grandpa has worked hard for the family all his life. My mother-in-law's words made me angry and sad, but my grandfather-in-law just smiled. See, this old man doesn't understand anything, Patricia. I was furious at my mother-in-law's laughing words. But soon the new house would be ready. Maybe things would change once we moved there. Since it was a house that Grandpa built, the family might show some gratitude and be kind to him. I couldn't completely abandon that faint hope. 2 months later, the house was finally built. For days, I had been forced to pack my in-laws' and husband's belongings, while my father-in-law's and my things were mostly untouched. Even when I tried to pack my things, my in-laws and husband kept giving me tasks, so I couldn't make any progress. But I thought it would be fine to move the small things later since this house wasn't going anywhere. On moving day, after most of the things were moved, I went to call my father-in-law, but my husband said, "Ah, you and Grandpa can stay here." "What? You can stay in this house. We don't need any extra baggage in the new house. In other words, you and Grandpa will live here from now on, and I'll give you Grandpa's debt too." "Well, you can at least be a housekeeper. Hey, let's go." "Yeah, I'm coming. Good luck with all the debt repayment and live-in care." With those words, my in-laws cheerfully got into the car and left. I was stunned for a while. I couldn't immediately understand what had just happened. Were we just abandoned? And not just me, but my grandfather-in-law too, only they would live in the new house. It took me a while to understand because it was beyond my imagination that someone could do something so cruel. How should I explain this to my grandfather-in-law? I slowly returned to the back room. I didn't mind taking care of my grandfather-in-law at all. That was my intention from the start. As I was about to timidly call out to him, who was sitting with his back to me, he seemed to sense my presence and turned around before I could speak. "Have they gone already?" My grandfather-in-law's expression as he said that looked completely different from how he had been just months ago. To be frank, he seemed like a different person. I thought maybe a different symptom had emerged, but the next moment my grandfather-in-law smiled. And then his following words surprised me. As I was talking to my grandfather-in-law, Mr. Jones came in. "Chairman, have you finished getting rid of the unnecessary staff?" "Yes, it's all done. Let's go, shall we?" Where are we going?" "Of course, to the new house." I left the house where I had been living, led by my grandfather-in-law, without understanding what was happening. The next month, countless calls came from my mother-in-law and husband. My grandfather-in-law said he wouldn't deal with them anymore, but I answered my husband's call because of the divorce. "Hey Emily, is Grandpa with you?" When I went to the old house, it was for sale. "It's not worth $1.82 million, so you can't repay the debt." "Is that why you did that?" "What do you mean?" "Put Grandpa on. Dad said he can't get in touch at all. That forgetful old man has done something outrageous." I knew what he was talking about, but I wanted to hear what my husband would say. Grandpa sold the company's stocks to the executive director. Thanks to that, the executive director became the largest shareholder. A shareholders' meeting and board meeting were held, and Dad was dismissed as president. The executive director was well-liked, and perhaps Grandpa believed he was better suited to lead the company. When I heard that Grandpa had sold the company's stocks to the executive director, my husband was outraged. The executive director must have deceived the senile old man into selling the stocks. "This is invalid," he exclaimed. "You seem to be misunderstanding something," I replied calmly. "Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he's more coherent now than he's been in years." "What?" My husband was in disbelief. Until that moving day, I had also believed my grandfather-in-law was suffering from dementia. But it turned out that Grandpa had been suspicious ever since my mother-in-law mentioned building a new house to live with him. So he devised a plan. He pretended to have dementia to observe how my in-laws and husband would react. As expected, they revealed their true colors one by one. In the end, they left my grandfather-in-law and me behind. I struggled to hold back my laughter because everything went exactly as I expected. Grandpa said with a grin. I was surprised, relieved, and a little conflicted. To deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies, Grandpa said with a laugh. He had been receiving regular updates on the company's operations from the executive director and Mr. Jones. With Grandpa stepping back, my father-in-law and husband had taken control, acting self-righteously and ignoring the employees' opinions, hosting lavish parties at the company's expense. Grandpa had handed over the company to my father-in-law, but grew increasingly concerned about its future. In the end, he decided he couldn't trust his son with the company and transferred it to the executive director instead. What about the $1.82 million debt? I asked, concerned. That's gone now, Grandpa replied. I did co-sign a loan for a friend's son, but I also own personal assets that far exceed that amount. After stepping back from the company's operations, I invested in real estate and made a considerable profit. But if I had told them that, it would have been clear my mother-in-law and husband would target it. That's why I only talked about the debt. The friend in question was the son of a benefactor who had helped my father-in-law when he was young. Moreover, the countryside land owned by the friend's son was being developed into a resort, and he had sold it at a high price, so there was no longer a need to take on the debt. You're kidding, my husband stammered. But more importantly, are you guys okay? We're not okay. Both my father and I were denounced by the company. What should we do now? Well, there's also the mortgage on the house, I said. What? What do you mean the mortgage on the house? My husband's voice trembled. Haven't you realized it yet? The house money should have been all paid by Grandpa. Maybe you don't remember what Grandpa said at that time. When my mother-in-law talked to him about the money, he set a condition. If it's a house where everyone, including me, will live, he would pay. Otherwise, he wouldn't. Even though the house was in my father-in-law's name, Grandpa had intended to pay if everyone was living together. But because they assumed Grandpa would pay and didn't check the documents properly, my husband signed without verifying everything. It just showed he really didn't have the qualities of a president. You're kidding. My husband's voice trailed off. Afterward, my parents-in-law lost the house they had built because they couldn't pay the mortgage. Now they live in an old apartment over 50 years old, struggling to pay off the unpaid loan. My mother-in-law and husband have been contacting me alternately, suggesting we all live together, but that's impossible now. My grandfather-in-law has retired from his chairman position, and now he has bought an old house in the countryside where we live together. Emily, you can go and live wherever you like freely. You don't have to worry about living expenses, my grandfather-in-law told me. But I chose to stay with him. If I'm not in the way, please let me be with you. When I said that, my grandfather-in-law's eyes welled up with tears. Thanks to Mr. Jones, the divorce was finalized and legal procedures were taken to exclude my former father-in-law and former husband from inheritance. I became my grandfather-in-law's adopted daughter. If anything happens to my grandfather-in-law, who is now my father, I intend to take care of him until the end. Now, the two of us enjoy working in the fields together. Dad, look at this radish. It's huge. In the warm sunlight, we share these peaceful moments. I wish for these days to continue, even just one day longer. From a young age, I was lovingly raised by my grandparents. But then, a minor accident took the life of my beloved grandmother. During that difficult time, I unexpectedly received a message from my long-lost sister-in-law. The message read, I need you to take care of your grandmother who passed away 3 months ago. I was at a loss for words. There was so much I wanted to say, but my cherished grandmother was no longer there. I had seen her pass with my own eyes. That call became the catalyst for everything that would soon come to light. My name is Linda Thompson, a 45-year-old single woman. The last time a significant man was in my life was during college. After we parted ways, I threw myself into the working world, landing a position in the marketing department of a major cosmetics company. Working overtime and weekends became the norm. Before I knew it, I had missed my chance to get married. Though that wasn't the reason I eventually left my job. 6 years ago, I transitioned into a desk job at a nursing home. The commute was a dream, just a 10-minute bike ride from home. A far cry from the hour and a half I used to spend on crowded trains. I've never moved out of my childhood home. Financially unsecure, and I'm quite capable around the house, if I do say so myself. So why stay? The answer is simple. I love my family, especially my dear grandmother. I was born and raised in California. My family consists of my parents, grandparents, and my brother, Brian, who is 5 years older than me. Now 50, Brian and I have a complicated relationship. As children, I adored him. He was a gentle, caring older brother. But after college, he changed. He got a job in car sales, moved out, and married a woman from work just 2 years later. We gradually grew apart, and he stopped coming home for holidays. Thanksgiving, spring break, even Christmas. I know he lives somewhere in the South, but I don't know where or if he has children. I can't even remember the last time I saw his face or heard his voice. The last thing I recall him saying was, "I'm leaving everything at home to you." As I rose through the ranks at work and became a manager, life got busier. My impression of Brian hardened into one of an unfeeling man. That's why I chose to stay in my childhood home and protect it. My parents are retired, and my 93-year-old grandfather, who suffered a stroke a few years ago, requires constant care. My parents take care of him now. And then there's my grandmother, Betty Thompson, aged 92, the woman I adored most in the world. My grandparents raised me when both my parents were working, and Grandma Betty, in particular, taught me everything I needed to know about life. Though she couldn't get out much in recent years, she was still lively, walking around the house on her own. That's why I decided to work at a nursing home, so I could be close to her if anything happened. One day, as I was getting ready to leave for work, Grandma Betty called out to me, "You forgot something." I didn't forget anything, I replied, but she handed me a few black licorice candies. "Here, take these." I smiled. Licorice had always been a favorite of ours. I tucked them into my suit pocket and left the house with a smile. Then tragedy struck, sudden and devastating. Grandma Betty had a severe accident. According to my father, after hanging laundry on the balcony as usual, she missed a step on the stairs and fell. We had always warned her about the stairs, telling her to leave the laundry to Mom and Dad, but Grandma Betty was as stubborn as I am. She believed in doing what she could on her own. It was an unfortunate accident, something we always feared. After suffering complex fractures in her femur and pelvis, she never made it home from the hospital. 4 months later, she passed away due to old age. I was heartbroken. I cried until I could cry no more. But I'm an adult now, and as the breadwinner of this household, I don't have the luxury of wallowing in sorrow. I had to handle everything: funeral arrangements, cremation, interment. Grandma Betty was originally from the Midwest, and with no close relatives to contact, we decided in a family meeting to have a small funeral with just close family members. We had to invite my brother and his wife, and I assumed they'd come without hesitation. But I was wrong. I couldn't reach them by phone or WhatsApp. I even sent an email, but there was no reply. As a last resort, I sent a text message, and the reply came on the day of the cremation. "I'm very busy overseas for work. Sorry, but I can't make it. I'll send the money later." I didn't care about the money. When I saw that message, I found myself speaking out loud without meaning to. Could his job really be so important that he couldn't find the time to say goodbye to the grandmother who adored us so much? It was hard to accept. At the funeral, we placed flowers in Grandma's casket, her makeup impeccably done, making her look as if she were peacefully sleeping. We included a photo of Grandpa and her favorite black licorice candy. While doing this, something shifted in my perception of my brother. From that moment, I started to despise him. Since then, the seasons have changed, and it's now winter. For me, it doesn't matter whether it's spring, summer, autumn, or winter. I don't care if it's always winter or always summer. I've even considered quitting my job, but Grandpa is still alive, and my parents will need care at some point too. I still need to earn a lot for that. With these thoughts, I mechanically got through my work, my heart filled with emptiness. Then, during a lunch break on a weekday, I received a call from an unexpected person. If the number hadn't been registered, I wouldn't have answered. My smartphone displayed the name Heather Thompson. She's my brother's wife, making her my sister-in-law. The only time we ever talked was briefly after their wedding, and that's all I remember. Why would she be calling now? I considered ignoring it, but the ringing wouldn't stop. Finally, I sighed and decided to answer. "Yes, this is Linda. Sorry to disturb you at work. This is Heather, Brian's wife. It's been a while." Heather started, her tone apologetic. Despite being in a higher position and older than me, she always maintained a humble attitude. When she suddenly decided to marry my brother, she made sure to greet my parents and me, even on behalf of my brother. To put it simply, she's a good person. That's why I couldn't understand why she would contact me now. It's okay. Do you need something? I tried my best not to sound cold as I asked. It's hard for me to bring this up. Heather hesitated before continuing. It's about Betty, your grandmother. What happened to my grandmother? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We've been taking care of her on my husband's orders, but it's already been over a month. Could you possibly come to pick her up? What? I couldn't comprehend what Heather was saying. So you're saying you've been taking care of my grandmother Betty, who died 3 months ago? Yes, we've been taking care of Betty at our... Wait, she died 3 months ago? Heather's voice was genuinely surprised. Why don't we calm down a bit? I suggested, and Heather agreed. A few minutes later, after regaining my composure, I carefully explained to Heather how my grandmother had passed away. In contrast, Heather's response was utterly perplexing. She claimed that she and Brian had been told to take care of my grandmother until arrangements were made at her home, and that they had been living together with her. There were only two possible conclusions. Either we were both not lying, or my brother Brian was. I had anticipated this to some extent, wondering why anyone would tell such a blatant lie that would be exposed so quickly. But now, there were things I needed to do before confronting him. I wanted to get in touch with Brian right away, but he was basically unreachable. I told Heather, I've never used my husband's cell phone either. He won't let me, she continued. However, I think I could talk to him on my cell phone while he's at home. He's been working remotely more often lately. I think if I ask, he'd probably agree to a video call. There's certainly power in face-to-face persuasion. But there was a problem. I wasn't even sure where they were living anymore. We've been living in Nye City, California, for over 10 years, so it's easy for us to visit your place, Linda, Heather said. We agreed to talk to Brian on Heather's cell phone that night and ended the call. As I hung up, mixed feelings swirled inside me. Nye City was just the next town over, and the idea that Brian expected me to care for some stranger's elderly relative just a few months after Grandma passed away filled me with repugnance. That evening, at the agreed time of 8 p.m., I called Brian using Heather's cell phone. By the way, Heather was also in the room with me at home. Despite my constant attempts to contact him in the past, Brian answered Heather's cell phone after just 3 rings. I made sure Heather could hear the conversation by putting it on speaker. Heather, where are you right now? You haven't even prepared dinner, Brian demanded in an imposing, arrogant tone. He was no longer the brother I knew. It's me, Brian, I declared firmly. Huh? He was clearly confused, and I waited for him to find his words. That's Linda, isn't it? Why, where's Heather? He stammered. I'm here, Heather responded, her tone steady. You? Why are you with Linda? Brian's voice wavered. Did you tell Linda about that matter? He asked, trying to regain control of the conversation. Yes, I did, Heather replied calmly. I told you it was too early to talk about it. Brian's frustration was evident. Ignoring his outburst, I pressed on. Heather mentioned that you've been working remotely lately. Why don't we talk face-to-face using a video call app? I'll send you the ID and password. If you refuse, I'll take Linda and go back home, Heather added, providing backup. Fine, Brian grudgingly agreed, his tone reluctant. I sent the login details using Heather's smartphone, and we waited. When Brian's face finally appeared on the screen, I noticed he looked slightly heavier than the last time I saw him. But it was undoubtedly my brother. So, what's so important that we have to face each other to talk about? I'm busy, Brian tried to play dumb, and it made my blood boil. Isn't it obvious? It's about our grandmother, I said, my voice sharp. What do you mean by saying we should take in our grandmother who died 3 months ago? I asked, my frustration barely contained. To my surprise, Brian replied calmly, you must be misunderstanding something. Our grandmother isn't dead. I'm taking care of her at my place. It was you, Linda, who asked for this, wasn't it? What? I was at a loss for words. Was he really so afraid of Heather finding out the truth? Could my brother really stoop this low? I sent you a text message, I said, my voice trembling with tears. I don't remember, Brian responded flatly. Grandma's here with me right now. Do you want me to bring her here? Yes, I do, I insisted, trying to maintain control of my emotions. Brian left his seat and returned a few minutes later with an old woman in a wheelchair. "Say hello, Grandma." "Linda, it's been a while. I'm Betty," the old woman spoke in a halting voice. "I just wanted him to stop this farce." The woman on the screen looked nothing like our beloved grandmother. "For one thing, my grandmother would never call me Linda. As you age, your appearance changes. She's been showing signs of dementia recently, so it can't be helped that her memories of you are vague," Brian said, determined to deny everything. "So you won't acknowledge the death certificate submitted by the district office?" I asked, incredulous. "Of course not. Documents can be forged these days," he smirked. "I was prepared for this. Just wait, Brian. I'll show you some evidence too." Leaving a perplexed Brian behind, I exited the room. A few minutes later, I returned with my evidence. "Well, isn't it, Brian? Long time no see, you ungrateful one." "Grandpa." Brian's eyes widened in shock. "You were supposed to be bedridden." "At one point, I was prepared to die. Even now, I can't go to the bathroom on my own. But my brain's still in good shape," Grandpa continued. "I've heard all about it from Linda. Are you saying that the woman next to you is my wife, Betty?" "Nonsense. Betty was much more beautiful." Cornered, Brian hung up, likely trying to log out of the video call. Heather, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Are you running away, Brian? Going to Catherine's place?" Brian's face turned pale, visible even through the computer screen. "How do you know that?" "I suspected it for a while now, Brian." "You underestimate me," Heather said, her voice firm. "Your grandmother has frequently let it slip, Catherine. But that's not Linda's name, nor her mother's." "Well, Brian trailed off. "I confirmed with Linda, and she had no recollection of the name Catherine. I had a suspicion and hired a private detective to investigate possible infidelity," Heather continued, laying out her evidence. "The results came out quickly. Pictures of you with Catherine, your affair, and the fact that her grandmother is the woman you've been caring for." Heather paused, letting the information sink in. "You've been preparing to divorce me, haven't you? Using every means possible to remarry Catherine, but I've caught you." Brian's attempt to maintain his composure crumbled. "I'm really sorry." "Forgive me, Heather." "Linda, I didn't mean to deceive you. I'll break up with Catherine." Heather didn't flinch. "I've already completed the divorce mediation process, Brian. I'm going back to my parents' house. We'll meet in court next." "Well then, goodbye, big brother," I said, and with those words, I ended the video call. The seasons have changed, and now, during the autumn equinox, I visited my grandmother's grave alone. Hands clasped together, I silently reported everything that had happened. Brian divorced Heather, and naturally, the outcome was overwhelmingly in Heather's favor. Brian ended up paying an enormous amount of alimony and even came crying back home at one point. However, thanks to Grandpa, who was still mentally sharp, a virtual dissoundment took place. Even his will states that Brian is no longer family. He wished to remarry Catherine, but women in this world are not so eager to marry a divorced man in his 50s with no savings and debt. Brian eventually had to quit his job at the automobile company and is now reportedly living in a cheap one-bedroom apartment, paying alimony while working odd jobs. It's all a case of reaping what you sow. Most of this information about Brian came from Heather, who I've grown close to. We often meet for tea as friends now. "Grandmother, I finished everything," I whispered, standing up from the gravestone. A slightly strong breeze blew, and at the same time, I heard a voice I loved so much. "Lynn, thank you. Please take care of your grandpa for a little while," the voice said. "Grandmother," I muttered, suddenly noticing something in my right hand. It was a piece of black candy, her favorite. But that was strange. I hadn't brought any black candy as an offering today. I'm not particularly a believer in gods or ghosts, but could it be? No, that couldn't be. There's always black candy at the altar, so I must have picked one up unconsciously and put it in my pocket without realizing it. But still, if I think that my grandmother is watching over me from somewhere, I feel like I can keep doing my best in life. "Thank you, grandmother," I murmured, looking up at the sky before leaving the graveyard. Every time I see her face, I feel sick. Oh dear, that's terrible. "Sherry, please pack your things and leave. What if something happens to Betty's child because of you?" I couldn't help but sigh at the malicious grins on my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's faces, realizing that all my efforts had been in vain. I replied quietly, All right, I'll leave. My name is Sherry, and I live with my husband Ellen in his family home. His father passed away, and since his mother has mobility issues, I knew we'd be living with her when we decided to get married. Before Ellen and I tied the knot, his mother was genuinely kind. She was always calm, smiling, and whenever I helped her, she'd say thank you. I thought living with such a mother-in-law would be manageable. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Once Ellen and I got married and started living together, her true colors began to show. First, she stopped thanking me for anything I did. I wasn't helping out just to hear her gratitude, so I didn't mind at first. But gradually, instead of thanks, she began to complain. You're so slow. Ellen will be home soon, and you haven't cleaned the bath or finished dinner. What's going on? I apologized, explaining that Ellen just happened to come home early that day, and I was doing the chores as usual. If your husband comes home early, you should work faster. You don't care enough about Ellen. That's not true, I protested, but she cut me off. I don't want to hear your excuses. Poor Ellen, why did he marry someone like you? There was no trace left of the kind woman I had known before our marriage. Still, I tried my best to meet her expectations. I could keep going because of Ellen's support. In front of Ellen, she pretended to be the ideal mother-in-law, kind and considerate. But I talked to Ellen about how she behaved when he wasn't around. Ellen believed me and said, I'll talk to Mom, and he did. After being scolded by Ellen, she behaved for a few days. But then she'd go back to her old ways. This cycle continued until one day she received a phone call. It was probably my sister-in-law, Betty, loudly badmouthing me so I could hear. Betty, who's married and currently pregnant with her first child, is just like her mother. She changes her attitude depending on the person and, frankly, has a bad personality. She once said, I never thought my brother would marry someone as wonderful as you. But now she says, you're always causing trouble for Mom. You're so useless. Mother-in-law and Betty have a weekly phone call where they bond over criticizing me. I was getting numb to it all. But after hanging up, my mother-in-law cheerfully called out to me and dropped a bombshell. Betty is getting a divorce. Her husband was a plain guy anyway, so it's for the best. Once she comes back for the birth, she'll stay here. You might not be needed anymore, Sherry. What? Oh, I can't wait. Make sure you prepare a feast for the day Betty comes home. I felt devastated. Until now, it had been mother-in-law versus me, but with Betty moving in, it would be mother-in-law and Betty against me. I was already worn down by mother-in-law's constant complaints, and the thought of another person adding to that was unbearable. Trying not to let mother-in-law see, I shed silent tears while vacuuming. I couldn't take this life anymore. A few days later, Betty arrived, heavily pregnant. She was in her 9th month. I greeted her with a hello, but she immediately complained, at least offered to take my bags. After taking her luggage to the room she'd be staying in, I heard her loud voice from the living room. Sherry really does have a plain face, doesn't she? As I prepared tea in the kitchen, Betty exclaimed, Oh, I can't stand it. Just looking at Sherry makes me feel sick. Next to her, my mother-in-law, laughing with a face just like Betty's, exaggeratedly said, Oh dear, that's terrible. Sherry, pack your things and leave. What if something happens to Betty's child because of you? Betty laughed mockingly. I had done my best for my mother-in-law, but it was never enough. But it seemed all for nothing. Feeling empty, I sighed and replied weakly, All right, I'll leave. I had anticipated this outcome from the moment I heard Betty was returning. I had always known that a day would come when I'd leave this house in either anger or sadness. I quickly grabbed my already packed bags, headed to the entrance, and picked up my car keys. Perhaps not expecting me to actually leave, my mother-in-law called out from behind, Oh, Sherry, are you really leaving? That's fine, but make sure you divorce Ellen. He deserves someone much better. I think that's for Ellen to decide. Thank you for everything, I replied calmly and left the house. I called my parents, who warmly told me to come home. They were furious when I told them about the comments from my mother-in-law and Betty. You don't need to go back to that house, they assured me, and for the first time in a while, I genuinely smiled. That evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Ellen stood there. Welcome home, Ellen. Thanks. Living with your parents will be a bit nerve-wracking. Don't worry, you'll get used to it quickly. I guarantee it, I said, greeting Ellen with a smile and inviting him in. The first thing he did was apologize to my parents. I had told them how supportive Ellen had always been, so they felt bad about his apology. Instead, they thanked him for trying to protect me and warmly welcomed him, saying, "Feel free to live here as long as you wish." Why did Ellen fit in so well with my parents? It was because when I found out Betty was moving back after her divorce, I had proposed a divorce to Ellen. I told him, "I'm already struggling with your mother, and I can't handle Betty on top of that." And I cried, saying, "Even if it means divorcing, I want to leave that house." Ellen was shocked but immediately apologized, saying he hadn't realized how much I was suffering. He didn't want a divorce and had negotiated with my parents that if things got too bad, he'd move in with me at their house. It seemed that Ellen planned to live with my parents for a while and then buy a house somewhere else. I was overjoyed when Ellen came to my parents' house. I was happy that he chose me over his mother and Betty. My mother prepared a feast to celebrate our arrival. As we enjoyed our meal and relaxed, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. When I answered with a simple, "Hello," I heard her panicked voice. "Sherry, Ellen hasn't come home yet. It's already late. Do you know where he is? I've tried calling him, but he's not answering. I'm worried something's happened." "Oh, Ellen's right here. It seems he's blocked your number," I said, turning to Ellen beside me. My mother-in-law's confused voice came through the phone. Ellen casually said, "Yeah, I've blocked your number." I relayed this to my mother-in-law. "What do you mean? Is Ellen with you?" "Yes, we're married after all." "Send Ellen back immediately. Didn't you say you divorce him?" "Ellen doesn't want a divorce, and neither do I. This is a matter between a husband and wife, not something for a mother-in-law to dictate," I responded calmly. Suddenly, my mother-in-law burst into tears. "Why? Why?" she sobbed. Betty, seemingly unable to watch her mother any longer, took the phone and said, "So you've stolen my brother? You're the worst." "I haven't stolen anyone. Ellen and I are married. You might have a plain face, but you're so audacious. One day, my brother will see the truth, and you'll regret it," she spat out, and suddenly the call ended. I filled Ellen in on the conversation, and both of us, in disbelief, blocked my mother-in-law's number. I also got Betty's number from Ellen and blocked it as well. With a sigh of relief from cutting ties with them, Ellen and I began searching for a new home. After visiting various properties, we found our dream home and decided to move out of my parents' house. We expressed our gratitude to my parents, who had let us stay for several months. They told us, "You can always come back," warming our hearts. One day, after settling into our new home and enjoying peaceful days, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Considering we had just moved, I thought it might be a service provider and answered. To my surprise, an angry voice shouted, "Finally, you pick up." Confused, I asked, "Who's this?" "You've forgotten your sister-in-law." I realized it was Betty. "Oh, Betty, how did you get this number? I was sure I had blocked you." She apparently changed her number when she got a new phone. I thought I'd have to block this one too, when Betty suddenly said, "Come back right now. I just had a baby and the house is a mess. Mom doesn't do anything." Well, mother-in-law has a bad leg, so it's understandable to some extent, right? That's no excuse. I'm struggling postpartum, and she's using her leg pain to avoid doing any chores. From Betty's words, it was clear that she and mother-in-law weren't getting along. Neither of them wanted to do housework, so it was only natural that they pushed the responsibility onto each other. But that wasn't my concern. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I have no plans to return." "Why not? You haven't divorced Ellen, right? We're family. We should help each other." "It's funny you consider me family now," I chuckled. Betty shouted in frustration, but I wasn't fazed. "I won't have to see your face again. When you see me, you feel sick because of my plain face, remember? I'm truly sorry, but if I came back to help, he'd just feel worse. Besides, mother-in-law didn't want to live with me either. It's okay if you don't consider me family. I might not have lived with you, but I never badmouthed you like Mom did. I know you and mother-in-law used to talk about me on the phone." She would purposely put it on speaker so I could hear. "I heard everything you said about me." Betty seemed to be searching for an excuse, but I told her I wasn't coming back and hung up. I immediately blocked her new number and resumed tidying up. That evening, a tired-looking Ellen came home and said, "Betty called me today." She changed her number. It seemed Betty had called Ellen in tears. The relationship between mother-in-law and Betty was at its worst, with constant fights whenever they met. They even argued over household chores, sometimes throwing objects at each other. When Ellen, concerned about the newborn, asked about the child, Betty broke down crying. Shockingly, her child had been taken away by her ex-husband. He had pleaded with Betty, saying he desperately wanted to see the baby. In response, Betty had retorted, "What do you want to see the child for? You're just a nuisance." Hearing this, her ex-husband declared he couldn't trust Betty with the child and took the baby away. In a fit of anger, Betty had said, "Then you raise the child." Now regretting her words, she was embroiled in a custody battle. Meanwhile, mother-in-law's leg condition had worsened, and she had been advised to use a wheelchair, but there was no way Betty would care for her. Mother-in-law managed with a cane at home, but the day when she'd need to move to a facility she despised seemed imminent. Betty had apparently sought Ellen's help, but their predicament was a result of their own actions. Ellen reportedly told her, "If you had treated Sherry right, you wouldn't be in this mess," before hanging up. He then blocked her number too. No matter how unreasonable they are, they're still family to Ellen. I worried that he might be hurt because of me, but he reassured me with a bright smile, saying, "You are my top priority, so it's okay. Besides, I'll be a father soon too." Smiling at Ellen's words, I gently caressed my growing belly, replying, "That's right. For the sake of our unborn child, it's best to sever ties with mother-in-law and Betty. That's our decision as future parents. We have no intention of informing them about our child. Ellen, my parents, and I want to shower this child with all the love we can offer. You should eat in the bathroom that suits you best." I was furious at Emma, my daughter-in-law, and even more so at my son Bob. I couldn't forgive them for neglecting my dear father. They better be prepared. What happened? The usual stuff, but this time I couldn't overlook Bob and Emma's behavior any longer. I decided to fight back. My name is Catherine, and I'm 60 years old. My family includes my 80-year-old father and my 40-year-old son, Bob. Originally, Bob lived with my husband and me, but after my mother's passing, my father was left alone. We decided Bob should move in with him, which was comforting since that house was where I spent my childhood. However, the distance between my current home and my father's made frequent visits challenging. I was grateful when my son volunteered to move in with him. "I'm worried about Grandpa, and I wanted to try living somewhere else," Bob said. He had never moved out before, even commuting to college from home, and probably longed for independence. "Thank you, please take care of Grandpa." I entrusted my father to my son. At that time, Bob was 40 and still single. I hoped he would find someone special soon, and that wish came true. 6 months after Bob started living with my father, he called me. "What's the matter?" "I'm getting married," he announced, catching me completely off guard. There had been no sign of a girlfriend, so this sudden marriage was a surprise. "When did you start seeing someone?" "I met her through a friend soon after I started living with Grandpa. She's a really nice person," Bob reassured me, and I felt relieved. Then came the day of the family meeting. My husband James and I participated. "Nice to meet you," I greeted Emma, who was to be my son's wife. "Hello, I'm Bob's father," my husband followed. Emma was tall, slender, and blonde, with sharp eyes. She was beautiful, but her behavior quickly changed my impression of her. "This is your mom and dad." Emma looked us up and down condescendingly. Being scrutinized by someone you just met is uncomfortable. "Is something wrong?" I asked Emma. "You don't look anything like your mom," she replied. "Me? Mom? Indeed, my son and I don't resemble each other. He probably takes after his father more." I was aware of this, but never expected to hear it from Emma, whom I had just met. "Where's your grandpa?" she continued. "He lives here." "What? I thought it was just the two of us." Emma seemed unaware that my father and son were living together. I assumed it was common knowledge. "Come on," she suddenly complained, acting childishly. Emma was the same age as my son but didn't seem her age at all. "I thought I'd be living with you alone, Bob," she pouted. My son looked disturbed by her behavior, and my husband was also visibly surprised by Emma's outburst. But Bob must have chosen her for a reason. Even as she threw a tantrum, my son looked at her kindly and calmed her down. "It's okay. I'll take care of Grandpa." "Really? I won't give you that burden," Emma replied. "If that's the case, I'm fine with that." Emma seemed convinced by my son's words. However, I couldn't forget her earlier behavior. Was she ignoring us, or did she simply not see us? Either way, it seemed like she only had eyes for my son. In a way, it was sweet, but as her future mother-in-law, I was full of worries. Could I get along with her? Our first impression was so overwhelming that I found myself disliking Emma despite just having met her. My husband later admitted he felt the same way. Will everything be okay? I asked, worried. The problem wasn't just with Emma. I was also concerned about her living with my father. Clearly, she was reluctant to live with him. Despite my son's willingness to care for my father, I feared Emma might be cold towards him. Even during the family meeting, she barely spoke to me and seemed distant. The same with my husband. I'm not just worried about myself, but mostly about my father. I usually don't visit often, but now I know I should check in regularly. I made a promise to myself to do that. There was no news from my son and Emma for a month after their marriage. I thought my son would contact me if there were any problems. But so far, there's been no word. I assumed this meant things were going well. So I decided to leave them be. Above all, I wanted to avoid any interaction with Emma. Then one day, Bob and Emma suddenly returned home. Emma looked visibly upset. What happened? I asked. I just don't get your dad, Emma snapped. She was angry at my father, saying he had stormed into her room after 2 a.m. because she had been on the phone loudly with friends until late at night. That's when most people are asleep, so I couldn't help but sympathize with my father. I told you I didn't want to deal with David, didn't I? Emma was angry, not with my son, but with me. I couldn't understand why she was angry at me. It was my son who decided to live with his grandfather, not at my command. Emma was lashing out, and I was at a loss. I wanted to live quietly with Bob, so why did things have to be this way? Her last comment struck me deeply. That's because you don't even care to look after your own parent. After venting her frustration, Emma seemed satisfied and left. Are you okay? My husband, who had witnessed the entire exchange, asked with concern. She's a difficult person, isn't she? If you have any problems, just let me know, he reassured me kindly. Thank you. In my nearly 60 years, this was the first time someone younger than me had blamed me so harshly. Of course, I would apologize for mistakes at work, but Emma's accusations were blatantly unreasonable. This wasn't how a daughter-in-law should treat her mother-in-law. I knew I should care for my father as his daughter, but he wanted to remain in a house filled with memories of my mother and me. He was still capable of taking care of himself, and moving him forcibly didn't seem right. This decision was made after much thought, and Bob agreed to live with him. I didn't think Emma had any right to interfere. This incident made me even less inclined to interact with her, though avoiding her proved difficult. One day, Emma showed up at my house alone, without Bob. It was the first time she had visited by herself, and her refusal to even address me by name irritated me further. I wondered if Emma lacked basic manners. What's going on? I asked, reluctantly stepping outside. Emma looked at me with distaste. Oh, you are here, she said, as if annoyed. Then she started yelling at me. This is all your fault. My fault. Yes, I married Bob thinking we would live together. So why do I have to live with David too? She was still holding a grudge about my father. I asked Emma, isn't Bob taking care of my father? He doesn't look after him at all and leaves everything to me. It's ruining our married life, she retorted. She glared at me. It's all because of you. With that, she left without waiting for a response. I wanted to explain to Emma that my father wanted to stay in his house, but it seemed pointless. Emma wasn't willing to listen, and anything I said would be met with resistance. The situation made me want to avoid Emma even more. But I was concerned about my son not caring for my father. Worried, I decided to visit my father's home after a long time. Even though he could take care of himself, I wanted to see if Bob was really looking after him. 2 years after Bob and Emma got married, they had a child, my grandchild. I decided to visit for Christmas, excited to meet my first grandchild. But now, it seemed like my father was being put on the back burner. I couldn't forgive Emma for treating my father like a nuisance. Finally, the day came for my visit. It had been 6 months since my last one. I'm home, I said. Emma greeted me with an unmistakably displeased expression. I was used to her attitude by now. It probably wouldn't change. I went straight to my father's room only to find it had been converted into a nursery. Had they given up his room for the grandchild? Stepping outside, I saw my father in the garden. What are you doing out here? I asked. Why was he sleeping outside in the cold? Emma then brought some food. Here's today's portion. Eat in the bathroom, as usual. I was shocked by her words. Why was my father eating in the bathroom? It's the usual thing, my father answered. Emma was treating him terribly. He had to eat in the bathroom and sleep outside. It was as if he wasn't even considered a person. I was also angry at my son for not speaking up. If this was the usual treatment, it meant my son was also failing him. This was unforgivable. I decided to confront both my son and Emma. I tried to persuade my father to move in with us, but he shook his head. This house has memories, he said. I expected this but insisted he should come live with us. It's not good to stay here anymore. Come live with us. I will never make you feel this way again, I said. It took time, but eventually my father agreed. I felt sorry for him, but it was the only way to retaliate against my son and his wife. So my father moved in with us. My husband gladly accepted him. I hoped David could understand our decision. I was deeply grateful for my husband's kindness. When I told my son and Emma about my father moving in with us, they responded with indifference. Is that so? They said. Emma seemed relieved. Just imagining her face made me angry. This was the start of my real retaliation. One day, after returning from a visit to Emma's parents' house, my son found his house had been demolished. What's going on? He asked, confused. The house where he had been living was now a vacant lot. I called him to our house. Why are you calling me out of the blue? He asked angrily. I needed to explain the situation. Hearing my story, he became even angrier. Why did you demolish the house without telling us? Well, you don't mean Dad, right? What does Grandpa have to do with this? I replied firmly. I don't want you and your wife taking over the house filled with memories. You're neglecting Dad, aren't you? I asked my son. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was a hassle to deal with visitors at a time like this. I coldly said to Emma, I didn't think I needed to be kind to someone who treated my dear father terribly. Bob's nowhere to be seen, and suddenly the house is demolished. What's going on? Mom did it, my son said to Emma. What? You did it? Emma still didn't address me by name. It seemed she never really saw me as her mother-in-law. Yes, I did it, I admitted frankly. I didn't think I had done anything wrong. My father and I had been harassed. Why would you do this? Our house is gone. Emma was angry. Explaining why I demolished the house seemed troublesome, but I did it because it was the house where I spent my childhood. My father never wanted to leave it. David's opinion didn't matter. Emma's reply made it clear she only thought about herself. I couldn't afford to lose this battle, but Emma, who married Bob, was incredibly difficult. She never called me by name and constantly harassed me. When I demolished the house, Emma finally showed respect as her mother-in-law in a moment of trouble. You finally called me Catherine, I said, unable to stop smiling. My son's face was strained. Emma, trembling, offered, I'll do anything if you drop the lawsuit. Then promise you'll never come near this house again, I demanded. Not just to my father and me, but preferably not to our grandchild either. I wouldn't want a child raised by someone like you. Emma apologized. I don't want to be separated from my child. I understood her maternal instinct, but I had no sympathy left for her. Ignoring her pleas, I continued, What you're feeling now is the pain I've been carrying all this time. Emma looked startled, perhaps finally realizing the weight of her actions. Turning to Bob, I asked, Do you still intend to stay married to someone like this? I looked at my son, who had been silent. Could he really be okay living with someone as unpleasant as Emma? Bob, you've been part of the harassment towards Dad, just like Emma. No, that's not it. Bob suddenly protested. I was always being ordered around. Ordered around by whom? I asked. Emma told me to feed Grandpa in the toilet and to keep him out of the house as much as possible, Bob confessed. I glared at Emma. She had threatened to take all his money if he didn't obey her. How could you? Emma objected. I sighed deeply, exasperated with Emma. Did she not love my son at all? Was she trying to separate him from his father? Of course I don't love him, Emma admitted. I married Bob because he was single until 40 and had a lot of money. I didn't need Bob, just his money. You married my son for that reason? I asked in disbelief. Yes, that's right, she confirmed. I was furious. I had never shouted so loudly before. Emma's unreasonable actions and threats towards my family were unacceptable. I could no longer consider her a human being. For the sake of my family's well-being, I had to take a stand. It's unfortunate, but goodbye, I said. I placed Emma's belongings outside and led her to the front door. Don't ever come near my precious family again. Emma's protests and knocking went ignored until she finally gave up and left. My son, stunned, didn't chase after her. It was natural for him to want to escape from the threats. I felt a wave of relief. I hadn't felt this good in a long time. Since Emma came into our lives, I had been constantly stressed and worn down. After all the harassment I endured, I believed I had managed to retaliate well against her. Peace finally returned to our home. My son divorced Emma without issue. Although Emma was initially reluctant, my son had no intention of reconciling given the daily threats he faced. The grandchild born to them would be cared for by my son, which I believed was the right decision. If my son had stayed married to Emma, my father would have suffered even more, and Bob might have faced more harassment. I was sorry for everything, but I couldn't easily forgive my son. He had failed in his responsibility to care for my father and should have consulted me if there were any problems, rather than simply obeying Emma's orders. It seemed unlikely we could live together again. I wanted my son to be independent and not return home. Living at home until 40 may have made him too dependent. I hoped he would learn to live on his own and fulfill his responsibilities as a parent. I understand, he said, taking his child and leaving our house. This was for the best. My father quickly settled into our home and seemed more at peace than he had been at the old house. Seeing him adjust so well made me very happy. Being with family truly makes any house a home. I felt deeply relieved that we could live together peacefully, and I hoped our family would continue to thrive harmoniously. My name is Jean, and I live with my husband Alex. Alex rarely does household chores and often treats me as if I'm his maid. I work part-time, but that doesn't seem to change his expectations. Hey, could you possibly cook dinner today? I asked Alex one evening. Huh? Why? He responded, looking at me like I'd just said something completely absurd. It looks like we're short-staffed today, and I might have to work overtime. Can you cook dinner for a change? I explained, hoping for some understanding. What are you whining about? I'm the one who brings home the bacon, right? It's only natural that you do all the housework, Alex replied, his tone dripping with superiority. His words left me speechless, and I didn't push the issue any further. Then, one day, as I was coming home, I was startled by a man's voice, calling out cheerfully, "Hey there, I'm home." It was my brother-in-law, Mike. Mike? What are you doing here? I asked, completely caught off guard. What do you mean? This is my house, he said, his words not matching reality at all. He seemed to be under the impression that he was at his parents' place. When I clarified that he wasn't at his folks' house, he just shrugged. Oh, if it's not, you should have just told me sooner. But I had told him that right from the start. Well, since you're here, make yourself at home, Alex said unexpectedly, welcoming his brother without hesitation. Wait, what? Why are you accepting this so easily? I protested, but Alex didn't seem to care, and so our life with Mike began. Mike, however, turned out to be incredibly rude. Hey Jean, I'm helping myself to the beer in the fridge, he announced, as if it were his home. I was shocked. He didn't even ask. When do you plan on leaving? It's already been 3 days, I asked cautiously. What? It's only been 3 days. Let me stay a bit longer, Mike replied, smiling as if nothing was wrong. Did he not understand that we didn't want him here? But that beer is Alex's, I started, trying to make a point. Then why don't you buy some more? He shot back casually, dismissing my concern. I wanted to argue, but I knew it would just be brushed off, so I stayed silent. A few days later, I asked Alex, when is your brother planning to leave? Huh? What are you talking about? My brother isn't leaving anytime soon, Alex said as if it were obvious. Apparently, Mike had a falling out with his parents and didn't want to go back home. I began to wonder if his earlier confusion about the house was an act. By the way, where's my beer? Alex suddenly asked. It's gone. Mike drank it, I replied. What? Go buy some more, right now, Alex demanded, his tone suddenly harsh. I had no choice but to comply. Just as I was about to leave, Mike called out, Oh, Jean, if you're going shopping, get some snacks too. Why don't you buy them yourself? I asked, my patience wearing thin. Because it's just a hassle. As a housewife, you should handle it, he said dismissively. looking down on me as if I were nothing more than a servant. Enough is enough, I finally snapped, unable to tolerate his behavior any longer. Huh? Are you standing up to me? Mike's demeanor changed instantly, becoming menacing. Look, I'm not saying I want to stay here forever. I'm just asking to crash here for a bit, right? No need to get all worked up, he said, trying to downplay his imposition. Shut up, no buts. I responded, feeling the pressure from Mike's presence. Just then, Alex walked in. What's going on? Why are you arguing? He asked, looking between us. Because Mike refuses to leave our home, I explained. So what? It's fine if he stays, Alex replied nonchalantly. Besides, you can just buy more beer, can't you? Mike chimed in. Right. Feeling utterly defeated, I decided to drop it and went to buy the beer. But my passive acceptance only seemed to encourage Mike's increasingly obnoxious behavior. Hey, Jean, beer, Mike called out, his voice grating on my nerves. Do you really think you'll get a beer talking to me like that? I snapped back. Huh? Are you defying me? Mike responded, his tone threatening. Before I knew it, a month had passed since Mike moved in. He had become as domineering as Alex, treating me like a mere servant. Well, isn't there a certain way to ask favors from others? Huh? What are you, a mere housewife, trying to tell me how to behave? Mike sneered, belittling me without hesitation. It was clear that Mike completely looked down on me. Just then, Alex called out from the entrance. Hey Jean, I'm off to play golf. You two have fun, he said casually. Wait a minute, along with Mike? I asked, panic rising in my chest. Yeah. So what? Is there a problem? Alex replied, indifferent to my concerns. There's a big problem. Given Mike's recent behavior, it's obvious he's going to pull something. At least go play golf with Mike. I don't want to be alone with him. He doesn't do golf, Alex responded, ignoring my plea as he headed out the door. Huh, that's kind of hurtful. So you really don't want to be alone with me? Mike approached, a smirk on his face. When are you going to leave this house? You're treating me like a servant, I said, trying to stand my ground. Not like you are my servant, Mike finally admitted, his tone oozing with entitlement. I'm single after all. I've always wanted a servant like this. He genuinely seemed to believe that a housewife was nothing more than a servant. What a terrible man. I'm not a servant. I'm a proper housewife. I retorted, my voice shaking with frustration. What's the difference? Anyway, bring me some snacks. Hurry up, Mike ordered as he lounged on the couch. Outraged, I ignored him. But Mike, furious at my defiance, grabbed an ashtray and hurled it across the room. It shattered a glass shelf, missing me by mere inches. Hey, who do you think is in charge here? You're getting a bit too cheeky, aren't you? He snarled, his anger palpable. Feeling genuinely threatened, I reluctantly brought him the snacks and a fresh beer. Perfect. This is the life I've always wanted, he said, settling into the role of master of the house. I was terrified that if I didn't comply, he might throw something else. All I could do was wait for Alex to come home, praying for this nightmare to end. After several hours, Alex finally returned. Oh, Alex, I was so scared. I rushed to him, desperate for some support. Despite his usual domineering attitude, I thought he might finally come to my aid. But instead, he looked around and remarked, What happened to this room? It's a mess. He prioritized the state of the room over my distress. Well, Mike threw an ashtray, and I was scared. I tried to explain, hoping for some understanding. Huh? It didn't hit you, did it? Then it's no big deal, Alex said dismissively, as if my fear was insignificant. I couldn't believe it. What kind of husband says that when their wife might have been seriously hurt? Mike, adding insult to injury, chimed in. Hey, welcome home. Your wife trashed the room. What? It was you. I protested, but Alex, possibly drunk, refused to listen. Why are you blaming my brother? Alex scolded me instead, siding with Mike. No matter how desperately I insisted I wasn't at fault, Alex wouldn't hear it. He scolded me to take care of things and to take care of Mike. Drunk, Alex was even more troublesome, repeating the same things over and over. If I didn't at least pretend to listen, he'd get grumpy and start causing a scene. No matter how exhausted I was, I had no choice but to endure his lectures. I'm tired, I muttered after Alex finally stopped 2 hours later. But even though I was completely worn out, Alex mercilessly asked, "So what's for dinner?" Didn't you eat out?" I asked, hoping that somehow he had. "Why would I eat out? You mean you haven't prepared anything?" His tone grew more irritated. I had just been scolded for 2 hours. How could he possibly think I had time to cook? "Oh, you're so useless. You're really a failure as a housewife," Alex sneered, not only criticizing my cooking but also negating my worth as a person. What on earth have I done to deserve this? I wondered aloud, my voice trembling with exhaustion and frustration. Mike, snickering from the sidelines, found the whole situation hilarious. "You're getting scolded. This is hilarious," he jeered. Maybe these brothers just enjoy tormenting people. In the end, no matter how tired I was, I cooked dinner for Alex and Mike. And as if to add insult to injury, they even complained that the food was bad. Finally, reaching my limit, I decided to confront Alex again. "Hey, when is Mike going to go home? He's not going to stay here forever, is he?" "Not that again," Alex said, clearly annoyed. Maybe I had chosen the wrong time to bring it up. "What's with you? Don't you care about my brother?" To be honest, I didn't. After all, he just showed up at our house and started tormenting me. Just living with such a person was driving me to the brink. "You know I've been having a rough time, don't you? How can you just ignore that?" I asked, unable to hide my hurt and frustration. "Look, everyone has stress, Alex began, before saying something utterly outrageous. "Mike is particularly stressed, so he has to use you as a punching bag." I stared at him in disbelief. "A punching bag? Me? Why?" "Because clearly in this house, you're the best fit to be a punching bag. You should be honored. You get to be Mike's punching bag," Alex said, as if he were bestowing some kind of twisted privilege on me. "I don't want that," I shouted, finally standing up for myself. But Alex just shrugged. "It's not about what you want or don't want. You're a punching bag. Punching bags don't have wills, do they?" He said it with such conviction that I realized he meant every word. And when I thought about it, Alex had been abusing me for a while now, yelling at me for no reason, even physically hurting me at times. You're cruel," I muttered, tears welling up in my eyes. But even as I cried, Alex didn't seem to care. "Oh, what a hassle. Women always think crying will solve everything. Cry all you want. I'm not going to do anything. Now go buy me a beer." Again with the beer. He didn't care about my feelings at all. Enough was enough. I couldn't take it anymore. "I can't take it anymore," I shouted, surprising even myself. Alex looked taken aback, but quickly reverted to berating me. "Why are you even mad? You have a problem with me and my brother. If you don't like it here, why don't you leave? This is my house, so you're the one who should leave." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Leaving me and staying with his brother wasn't the problem for Alex. Even when I asked for clarification, all he could say was, "Yes, you should leave." That's crazy. Why should Mike get to stay when he's the one who came later? "He's my brother, right? And you're just a stranger who isn't blood related to me," Alex said coldly. A stranger. I never imagined that the man I married out of love could treat me so horribly. Something inside me shattered at his words. "Oh, what? Are you shocked? If you hate it so much, just leave. You can divorce me too," Alex taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. I stood there in disbelief. Was he really considering divorce? It seemed that Mike was more important to him than I was. That night, we both went to bed without saying another word. But I couldn't sleep. Alex's cruel words echoed in my mind. Leave. Divorce. Was I the only one who thought we were in love? As I lay there, my pillows soaked with tears, I made a decision. A few days passed after that incident before Alex called me. "Hey, where are you? Where did you go this morning?" His voice sounded irritated. "You just noticed? It's been a few days since I left," I replied calmly. "I didn't care if you were gone. I was eating instant noodles, but I've run out. Make me some food." Alex's tone grew flustered as he raised his voice. I couldn't help but think he could keep eating instant noodles for the rest of his life. "Well, I've started living alone," I responded. "What? You're living alone?" He seemed genuinely surprised. There was a studio apartment available right away, so I signed the lease on the spot. I'll have the movers send my stuff later. "What the hell are you thinking? Make dinner for me and Mike," Alex demanded, his frustration palpable. "Why should I? You were the one who told me to leave," I reminded him. No, that was. Alex tried to sound firm, but his voice gradually faltered, his own words betraying him. Anyway, come back home. This is a husband's order, he said, attempting to regain control by yelling at me. But strangely enough, I wasn't scared of Alex anymore. Why do I have to come back? There's nothing but unpleasantness for me if I return. Whether it's unpleasant or not doesn't matter. You're a servant in this house, he retorted. Again with the servant comment. Did these brothers really think I had no human rights? I was too flabbergasted to respond, so I decided to tell him about my decision. Alex, do you know I've decided to do as you said. What? What are you talking about? I'm getting a divorce. A divorce? He sounded shocked. How could he be so surprised when he was the one who had brought up the topic? Don't be ridiculous. There's no way I'm getting a divorce. I refuse, he snapped, unwilling to lose this convenient housekeeper. But his obnoxious behavior only strengthened my resolve. It's because of you and your brother. You've oppressed me this whole time, and I've been holding back. Perhaps realizing I was serious, Alex's voice began to tremble. Hey, you're joking, right? Are you seriously going to get a divorce? I'll go to your parents and convince them. What good would that do? I already talked to them. They won't listen to you. What? He sounded panicked, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. If only he had kicked out his brother and changed his ways sooner. Come on, please reconsider. My brother says he's sorry. These were the kinds of people who only apologized when they were in a pinch. There was no way I could trust their words of regret. I'm sorry, but I can't trust a word you say. I will never forget what you've done, nor do I intend to forgive it. Hearing this, Alex became even more desperate. Wait, please, I'm begging you. But I was done pleading. The more we talked, the more pathetic Alex seemed. Goodbye. We have nothing more to discuss. Wait, let's talk this out. Please don't go through with the divorce. I proceeded with the divorce process through my lawyer, and it was successfully finalized. After I left, Alex and Mike ended up having a big fight over who would do the housework. Two grown men fighting full out, they both ended up in the hospital. After all they had done to me, they got what they deserved. Now, even though I'm single, my life is much easier than when I was with Alex. I only wish I had left him sooner.